generally bring up, and neither one of those teaches what you're saying. Okay, the one says that the people who are in invincible ignorance are not going to be held guilty in that matter in the eyes of the Lord. Wait a second, that's true, because the church teaches that the people who are left outside the church are damned for their other mortal sins. It doesn't mean they can be saved. They can't. It's a dogma that you must believe in Jesus Christ. That's a dogma, okay? And the other statement says that people who are in invincible ignorance, if they sincerely seek out God, will, by the operating power of divine light and grace, be led to eternal life. Divine light and grace is a phrase in the New Testament for accepting the gospel. So that's what he's saying. Okay, and Father Michael Mueller, actually, who was writing at the time, and I don't agree with everything he said, but he made some good points on this matter. He pointed out that this idea that people can be saved who are invincible ignorance is wrong. It's not what Pius IX was teaching. Furthermore, the statements of Pius IX were less authoritative than the statement of Eugene IV, which is absolutely infallible. But here's the thing. If a person doesn't gravitate toward truth, which unfortunately at this time you don't, you'll never embrace the truth because there's too much bad will operating. And so you're also dishonest. If you were more honest, you would admit you do believe Jews and Muslims can be saved. Which means they can be saved. Which means they can be saved according to you.
But that's what you just quoted the Pope that said that, where, what did you say, Pope Leo, or I forgot, but you said...
Pius IX.
Pius IX, you just said that, invincible ignorance.
No, but he's not saying, okay, that they can be saved in those documents. He's not saying that. He's saying that they're not held guilty in that manner, which is true. That's what even the saints who absolutely believed all the people who are ignorant are lost pointed out, that they are lost for their other sins. They're not lost for rejecting the gospel if they've never heard of it. They're lost for their dishonesty in their lives, for their sexual sins, for their idolatry, for worshiping things that are clearly not divine. That's why they're damned.
Some will be judged according to their conscience, some will be judged according to the law. I mean, that sounds very similar to that, too.
What he's saying is that the natural law is written on everyone's heart. And that's why God can condemn those pagans to hell, even though they've never heard of him. Because they are committing sins against the natural law. And actually, all the missionaries, okay, the missionaries to South America, the missionaries to North America, the missionaries to Asia, all the traditional missionaries believe the opposite of what you believe. They believe that all these pagans, if they were not reached with the gospel of Jesus Christ, are lost. Because that's the teaching of the church.
What can I interest you in?
And if invincible ignorance can save someone who's not heard of Jesus, well, what if he's heard a little bit about Jesus?
Then he's rejecting it.
So wait a second. How much does he have to know?
I mean, we can't determine that, obviously.
Right, and so basically what you're saying is it's possible for someone who's even heard of Jesus but hasn't heard a good argument for him could be saved.
Probably not necessarily.
You see, you don't know, because your position is heretical, and what you're doing is actually reducing the meaning of the dogma to a meaningless formula. Exactly what Pius XII said in his statement in Humani Generis, which was correct, that these people who adopt this idea, which you hold, are reducing the truth of the church, which has been defined, to a meaningless formula.
But this whole argument, you've been quoting so much, but it doesn't get down to the point to why, you reject the papacy.
You reject the papacy. Don't ever say I reject the papacy. You reject the papacy. You do. You're very confused. You're very blind. You're very blind. I wonder if you've even prayed a 15-decade rosary in your life. Probably not. Okay?
Farewell.
You're very blind. And so, the papacy is not just... Do you know we've had anti-popes in church history?
Yes, but every time we had an anti-pope,
the Great Fox appreciates all you.
That's not true. It's just wrong. Okay? There were times, such as during the Great Western Schism, where the true pope would die, and there would be no true pope, but there would be an anti-pope.
But they always resolved the issue, though.
They eventually resolved the issue, but not until there was massive confusion. There were 3 claimants at one time during the Great Western Schism, and even the true pope was the weakest of the 3 in terms of the number of followers he had.
let me have my little share on what I think about Vatican II and what happened. I mean, you can whatever butt in anytime you want and let me know. But this is basically what happened. So during Vatican II, I think there was Freemasons involved in there.
Well,
I think Freemasons entered the church, and that was even predicted by saints. Like 100 years before, they said Satan's going to enter the church and it's going to come through an organization. And so I think the Freemasons went into Vatican II. They tried the best what they could do to mess up the faith, but the faith was never going to get.
Well, listen. Your opinions about what happened are meaningless.
Wait, yours are just opinions too, because you don't have.
Okay, give me an example of something I've said that's my opinion that I can't back up.
Because all the documents you've been quoting is also your interpretation. Just like a Protestant can interpret a Bible. I mean. No,
I've already explained to you that there's a distinction between the Bible and the Magisterium. That the Magisterium is our proximate rule of faith. That's what we use. That's what we go by. Okay, and furthermore, the interpretation I'm giving you is the interpretation of your own anti-popes. They agree with me that it's binding. I quoted to you statement after statement, but you just don't want to hear the truth because you're a liar. You're just a liar.
Can I interest you in some of my words?
My advice to you is you need to start praying the full rosary each day. You need to more carefully look at the information in our material, not Michael Voris's garbage. And it's actually amazing that he has so many followers. It shows how bad-willed people are because his stuff is such empty garbage. I mean, he has some true things to say, but in terms of his conclusions about the church, it's just absurd. And anyone who sees the video that we did on him, it absolutely destroys his claims. It proves that the guy's a total deceiver. Benedict XVI, on the warpath against modernism, Benedict XVI denies everything. Everything. He says the gospel is inaccurate. He says Jews can be saved. He says Protestants don't need conversion. He says the Orthodox are in the church.
Well,
all right, here's a simple point. Vatican I teaches that if you reject the papacy, you're outside the church. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Does Benedict XVI teach that?
It doesn't matter if he said it about it or not.
No, it does, because
you have to respect the faith from the whole, not just from each individual pope. You can't just sit there and individually judge a pope. No, you take the whole entire faith. That's what I'm doing.
For the right price.
No, the saints of the church and the doctors point out that if you have a guy who claims to be pope, who is departing from the faith, he must be rejected as a heretic and an anti-pope.
Can I interest you in some of my wares?
Like I said, it's not binding on the faith.
No, it is, because here's the thing. It's heresy to believe that a heretic's a member of the church. That is binding on the faith. If you believe a heretic is a member of the church, you deny the faith. Benedict XVI is a heretic. It's that simple. Therefore, the only conclusion that you could come to is he's not the Pope. He's not in the church. He can't lead the church. Just like pro-abortion politicians leave the church. Just like you, unfortunately, leave the church by defending people who promote heresy. Just like Michael Voris leaves the church because he promotes justification by faith alone.
Yeah, but the Pope never loses his authority that way.
Yes, canon law teaches that a publicly heretical cleric loses his authority without any declaration. Canon 188.4.
How many popes have been heretics and excommunicated from the church already?
There's only been one valid pope before the Vatican II anti-popes. Okay, who aren't valid popes. But in terms of the valid popes in church history, Honorius was the only one denounced as a heretic. Okay.
And could it be possible though that even though these popes are bad will, bad intention, could it still be that they still have the authority to the office that they do hold?
No.
No, it's not possible.
Not possible. It's impossible. I can tell you infallibly, they don't have it. They don't have it. Okay.
But what if this pope never speaks infallibly?
It doesn't matter. Even if he never did, I can tell you infallibly he doesn't have it. He's not a Catholic. He's no more a Catholic than the Dalai Lama. If you think he's Catholic, you frankly, once you've seen the evidence, you spit in the face of Jesus Christ.
But that's just like saying, I've had people, I've argued with people saying,
greetings.
Oh, you confess your sins to a priest, but what
armor,
if he's a child molester,
weapons,
what if he does this,
I have it all.
Blah, blah, blah,
how may I help you?
Well, he still has that authority to absolve me. He still has the authority to consecrate the body and blood of Christ. just like the Pope has the authority to still be Pope.
That's a false analogy, because the priestly character is an indelible mark. There are 3 sacraments that give an indelible mark: baptism, confirmation, holy orders.
Yeah.
But an office of the church, okay, can be lost. The mark of the priesthood, assuming the guy is validly ordained, cannot be lost. An office or membership in the church can be lost through heresy.
Okay, but the sacraments are still valid, so why do you have
Wait a second, that's a broad statement.
Huh?
Which sacraments?
Pretty much the body of Christ.
No, the body and blood of Christ is not present at the Novus Ordo. But that's a separate issue. It's not.
That's separate, yeah.
But he's not a pope. Even if he had the most reverent Latin masses in the world, he wouldn't be pope. It wouldn't make any difference. He's not a Catholic. Do you realize he teaches that do you know who the Orthodox are?
Yeah, the Eastern Church.
Right. Do you believe that they're in or out of the church?
They're schismatic. They're illicit, basically.
Okay.
See, their sacraments are valid.
Wait a
They
second.
are valid, but the thing is, they're not in communion with Rome, so therefore...
Are they inside the church or are they outside the church?
They're outside the church.
Okay. He teaches the opposite. He teaches that they're inside the church.
Well,
Do you believe me on
you
that?
have to understand which way he's talking about it, though. I mean, I can understand it's
Oh,
totally
boy.
different than the Protestants. The Eastern Orthodox are totally different from the Protestants because they're actually...
No, they're not.
They're the same faith. They have a valid priesthood. They have a valid patriarch. I mean, their clergy is valid. Their sacraments are valid. So why are they outside the church?
Because they're heretics. They deny the papacy.
Well, you deny the papacy.
No, I don't. No, I don't. It's just a lie.
Well, then I think you're in denial about the papacy because...
You don't have any idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, but Christ is not going to leave his church.
Christ what?
Christ will not leave his church.
I agree. That doesn't mean that the church cannot be reduced to a remnant. Okay? That doesn't mean that anti-popes cannot lead people astray into a counter-church that calls itself Catholic but actually isn't. That's what you're part of. You're part of actually the counter-church.
So, but the thing is, I don't even go to the Novus Ordo Mass. I go,
But wait a second. This is one thing I noticed, and we've noticed when talking to so many people like you, is that because you're, I have to say in charity, in a spiritual fog, that the devil will not allow you to grasp the simple points. He'll shift your attention immediately away when you begin to hit on a truth. And when I pointed out to you about the Orthodox, how they're outside the church, which you agreed, you said they're outside the church, and then I said, does Benedict XVI believe they're outside the church? And then I proved that he believes they're inside the church. You just said, well, you have to understand what he means by that. No. He's saying they're in the church. He not only says they're in the church, but he says that position is binding. Do you see the problem?
According to you, you're taking everything that what the popes are saying as binding of the faith, and
no,
I don't. So
even if it's not binding, okay, forget the binding consideration. It's heresy. He says that the Orthodox are in the church. Do you agree that's heresy?
Yeah, I agree that's heresy. But
okay, someone who teaches heresy is a heretic.
Yes, I understand, but it's a totally different argument as if it's binding on the faith.
No. Okay, we can prove it's binding, but that's irrelevant. That if he's a heretic, you agree he's a heretic?
Well, from your interpretation, I'll say yes, but I can
okay,
interpret it
heretics,
reading something else.
The church teaches... Now, you can't interpret it another way. You can't. It's just a lie. You can't. Okay, there's nothing to prove it. Okay, we have all this documentation to prove exactly that. He proclaims that the leaders of the Orthodox are in the church. Okay, the Code of Canon Law explains what the meaning of a particular church is, and Dominus Jesus and Benedict XVI say that these Orthodox individuals are particular churches, which means local segments of the true church. So you can't explain it away. So you shouldn't say things that aren't true. You can't. Jesus says you'll be held accountable for every idle word. So you can't just say things to try to win an argument or to try to respond if you don't know they're true. It's not true. Okay, so stop saying it. All right, so he teaches that they're in the church. That's heresy. He's a heretic. Heretics are outside the church. Do you realize that?
I know, you quoted that before.
Okay, so is he outside the church?
So Benedict XVI?
Yeah.
No, it's still Pope.
No, I didn't ask you that. I asked you, is he outside the church?
No,
So he's a heretic, but he's not outside the church?
But like I told you before, he could speak however he wants, but that doesn't invalidate his papacy. And I know you've quoted things before that does say that, but it doesn't cut it like that.
Well, you just refuse to accept the truth.
Okay, for example, so do you agree that Satan entered the church and tried to pretty much change
Crime
it?
doesn't pay.
That's what Vatican II was.
I would not phrase it that way, because
Move along.
when you typically talk about the church, you're talking about the church's official teachings and the actual organization of the church.
No, not that. The people in it, though.
I would say that Satan, spread an apostasy that caused many people to leave the church and follow heretical priests and so-called bishops, and he constructed a counterfeit church, which purports to be Catholic but isn't. And the reason it's counterfeit, the reason it has left the Catholic Church, the reason you are following an entity which is actually not the Catholic Church but has left the Catholic Church, is because the guys who kicked it off, who kick-started it, John the 23rd and Paul the 6th, were anti-Pope infiltrators. Okay, so what you're following are two men, just like people were following the anti-popes in the Great Western Schism, who purported to have papal authority but didn't. And so nothing of what they do is protected, and that's why they teach so many heresies. And this vast structure has dominated, but it was started under these anti-popes, whereas the true church still exists, but in the remnant of Catholics who maintain the traditions of the faith. And this whole deception is predicted. Jesus says that the great apostasy, will be so profound that even the elect would be deceived if that were possible. That this deception would center around the holy place, the holy place. And St. Paul says the same thing about how there will be false signs and wonders. And that's what you're dealing with. And the doctrinal facts prove it. But see, someone who loves Jesus Christ at all would be repulsed by John Paul II and Benedict XVI. Absolutely repulsed.
But you're declaring me as a heretic, even though I don't agree with all those teachings that you've been saying that are heretical. I don't agree with that. I pretty much go to Mass every Sunday at a traditional Mass, but like you sit there and you still label me as a heretic. So.
Yeah, you're a heretic for a number of reasons. Number one, you believe Jews and Muslims can be saved.
I just told you what I thought about that. They're outside the church. They can't, but however...
But they can. They can't, but they can. That's a lie. Let your yes be yes, let your no be no.
On really thin ice. Even Protestants could go to heaven. I mean, they're walking on thin ice, but not through their faith. You don't know how God is going to judge you.
Well, truth is meaningless to you. If I can prove, which I have, that Pope Eugene IV declares all the Jews and the pagans and the heretics are lost, and you say Jews can be saved, that's heresy, Jose. It's heresy. That doesn't mean Jews can't be saved, but actually they can be saved by invincible ignorance. No. There are no exceptions mentioned in any of the dogmatic definitions, and there are at least 7. There are at least 7 dogmatic pronouncements on outside the church there's no salvation. There are no exceptions mentioned in any of them. In fact, all exceptions are positively excluded. The language is no one at all. Every human creature, Nobody. That's the language. And so for you to... Go ahead.
From your movement that you're trying to start right now, it's very similar to what Martin Luther was doing. When Martin Luther did, he did see a problem in the church, and there was a problem in the church. There were people selling...
Actually, no, you agree with Luther.
No, I don't.
You do, because you promote people like Voris, who promotes Luther's heresy of faith alone.
Hold on, let me finish my statement, though, on Luther. So Luther saw what was going on in the church, and it was wrong, and you're seeing what's going on in the church, and you see, obviously, it's wrong, but what are you doing very similar to what you're doing? You're breaking away from the church, and you're saying, well, what the church is over here?
You don't have any idea what you're talking about. You don't have any idea about what the church is. Do you understand that the church is not the buildings? Do you understand that?
I understand that. It's the hierarchy. It's the people in charge of it.
It's the true faithful, not people who claim to be Catholic. It's people who actually are. Benedict XVI praises Luther. John Paul II praised Luther. They agreed with Luther on justification. It's precisely because I reject Luther that I reject them. They teach that Lutherans are part of the church. That's in the Decree on Ecumenism. That all the people born in these communities cannot be accused of the sin of separation.
Yeah, but I don't, like I just told you, I don't...
And so you're so blind, and it's because you're a liar. Because
I don't agree with the heretical stuff like that. That's what I'm saying, but I'm receiving all the sacraments, so what are you saying? I'm still a heretic?
you're not receiving the sacraments. You're receiving nothing but a piece of bread that people think is the body of Christ. It's not.
I just told you, I'm not going to the I go to the Novus Order Mass every once in a while, but for the most part, I go to the traditional Mass. You're saying that's not
So, okay, well, it depends. Is the priest who celebrates the traditional Mass older or younger?
Younger.
Yeah, he's ordained the new rite of ordination, which parallels the Anglican rite in terms of what it was deleted from it. The references to the sacrificing priesthood, the same things that the Anglicans deleted, okay? The prayers were deleted from the new rite of ordination, and because those things were deleted, Pope Leo XIII declared in Apostolicae Curae that the Anglican rite of ordination is invalid. So on the same grounds, the new rite is invalid. In fact, I'm totally convinced that the new rite of ordination is invalid. Definitely.
So you're saying it doesn't matter if they're ordained by an official bishop as long as the ordination...
No, because here's the thing, you probably don't even know basic sacramental theology. And I say that because if you're going to say that someone's wrong, and as you are, it's inexcusable for you not to know these things. But do you understand how a sacrament is valid or why and the elements that are required?
Yeah, it has to be performed by a valid priesthood, and it has to be actually consecrated the correct way.
You have to have matter, form, minister, and intention. Okay, like in baptism, the matter is the water, the form of the words.
Yeah.
Okay, the minister is the person baptizing. If you substantially alter any of those things in a corrupting way, the sacrament is invalid. Okay, so you can have a bishop who's valid, but if he's using a mutilated rite and the words aren't proper, then the form is wrong.
So you're saying after Vatican II they changed it, or what?
Yes, they changed everything. They have a new rite of ordination, okay, a new mass, a new catechism, a new code of canon law, because it's a new religion. It's the new counterfeit religion.
Okay, but I would say that, the authority still... for example, the Pope had the authority to change the words if he chose to. That's what I agree with.
No. Pius X even pointed out that the Church has no power over the substance of the sacraments. He proclaimed that in Ex Quo. Because they were instituted by Christ. Okay, so the Church itself cannot even change those essential elements of the sacraments. The Church can't change the faith. And those essential elements of the sacraments, what Christ himself decreed to be preserved in a sacramental sign, are unchangeable. All right? And
the meaning is still there when the consecration is happening.
Well, we're switching issues here. We were talking about the rite of ordination. Now you're talking about the Eucharist, but the meaning is not there. The meaning is not there in the Eucharist either, for the new so-called Eucharist. It's not.
So you're saying for me to be in full communion with God, I need to break away from the Roman rite and what?
You need to break away from the invalid new rite and invalid priests who were ordained in Paul VI's new phony rite. But most importantly, even if you did all that, even if you went to the most reverent traditional Mass in the world, you wouldn't please God at all, because you reject what he has revealed. And so when you reject what he has revealed, you sever the initial connection to God. And so anything else you do is basically worthless in his sight. That's what we see in the Old Testament. He will hear your prayers if you sincerely pray to find the truth. But in terms of all the effort you put out, it's worthless, meaningless to him, because you are spitting in his face by resisting what he has said. So when he says that you must believe in me, have you ever read the New Testament?
Yeah.
Okay, do you know how many times Jesus says you have to believe in him? That you can't get to heaven without him? He says it over and over again. Yet you're saying that someone who disbelieves in Jesus could get to heaven. That's not only contrary to the clear words of Scripture, but the Council of Florence, the Athanasian Creed, all these dogmatic pronouncements. It's blatant heresy.
So, but, you're familiar with that doctrine of... I lost my train of thought. Okay, in the Bible, so are you trying to say that the Roman Rite basically gave the salvation?
No, I'm not, because as I said earlier, the organization we're talking about is a pseudo-organization. It's not the church. So whatever it does, it could say anything, it could do anything. It does not impact what the church does, because the men who kick-started it were invalid anti-popes. So it's basically like this. John the 23rd, left the Catholic Church. He was a heretic. But he purported to get himself elected pope. The election was invalid because he was a heretic, and also there's evidence he wasn't even elected. The whole thing was rigged. And so he started this new structure. Okay, so you have the Catholic Church on the left, and then you have this new structure that John the 23rd is now leading on the right. He's an invalid anti-pope, even though a lot of people think he's pope. So a lot of people start following him. They start to move from the left to the right. Okay? And they really follow him and move from the left to the right when this organization becomes more wild and wacky and embraces false religions and embraces Protestantism and teaches ecumenism and changes the rites. Okay, and more people go along with this, and they reject Catholic teaching. So they're leaving the left side and moving to the right. And they think they're the Catholic Church. They're calling this organization the Catholic Church. It's not. It's a counterfeit church. Whereas the true church on the left is still there, but it's been reduced in size. Only the people who adhere to the traditional faith are still part of it. So you have this massive deception where the people think that this organization on the right, led by John the 23rd and then his successor in invalidity, anti-Pope Paul VI, they think these guys are the popes, but no, they're just part of this counter-church. And that, we believe, is the whore of Babylon. Even if you don't believe that, but it demonstrates that this concept, has favor in Catholic tradition and in Scripture and in Catholic prophecy.
Okay, I'll say John 23rd. I'll give you that. Okay, well, he's a valid pope.
No. Not only is there evidence that there was fraud in the election, but the Church teaches that a heretic cannot be validly elected. That's the teaching of the true Church. Okay, Pope Paul IV issued a bull on that. And so his election was invalid, and the heresies the guy promoted were absolutely astounding. He said, Islam is a faith that binds us to the one God. He says we shouldn't convert Protestants. He even said about a pagan temple that the images, communicate wisdom. He praised the non-Christian religion. I mean, the guy was just pure devil. He actually wore the breastplate of a Jewish high priest. There are all kinds of pictures of that. He's a total conspirator. So he was invalid. And then John Paul I was invalid, and John Paul II was a manifest heretic, and far worse. And he was invalid, and Benedict XVI, so you're following the counter structure. That's what you're doing. But the deception is that you think it's Catholic.
No. What I think by people are going to be led astray that you were talking about earlier is not people like me. There's people out there that are Catholics that will believe what popes like that are saying. They'll believe, they'll see them, it's okay to go to a Jewish synagogue because so-and-so did it. No, I'm not one of those people. I know that that's heresy, but however, the church is still going to be there until the end of time, and I say it's still the church, but obviously you're going to say, well, that's not the Catholic Church anymore. It moved over.
Does the Catholic Church teach heresy?
What was that again?
Does the Catholic Church teach heresy?
No, it doesn't.
Does that church of Benedict XVI teach heresy?
Yes, but like I told you before, it's not fine.
Okay, it's just logic. If the Catholic Church doesn't teach heresy, his church does. It's not the Catholic Church.
But like I said, everything that they're talking about that is heresy, you're saying that they're saying it's binding on the faith, but it's not. It's not.
Okay, according to you, even though we can prove it theologically, even though you have no support in tradition for what you're saying is blown away by the facts of what is infallible and binding in Catholic teaching. It's blown away by what they say about it. I mean, it's absurd. You're just hanging on to nothing more than a myth. It's like believing in a fairy tale. And it's all because you savor the things of external community rather than the things of God. What really attracts your attention is showing up at a building, meeting with people, thinking that you've got this structure, not what Jesus Christ himself taught. You're not really attracted to Christ. You're attracted to man.
How do you know? You don't know if I fast on Friday. You don't know if I pray the rosary daily. You don't know if I, give up a lot of sacrifices. How do you know if I'm doing all that?
It doesn't matter. I didn't say that, actually. What I said is, by your refusal to adhere to Catholic teaching, you prove that you're of bad will.
So you're I don't know. It's just going to always go back to the same argument.
That's because you're a liar, and people like you, you could argue with for years. And unless you pray and start to be honest, it's pointless. And see, there's a lot of pride there, though, because you really, and I have to say this in charity and in the interest of your salvation, you don't know almost anything about Catholic teaching, almost nothing. And that you're trying to correct us, and we've obviously looked into this stuff, and we can back up what we're saying. So there's a blindness there that you would say, well, maybe I should familiarize myself with this. See, God resists the proud and gives His grace to the humble.
The only way to declare people like me, what you say that are post-Vatican II Catholics, as heretics is if the Church itself held a council and actually said that people that believe in this or that's part of this sect is actually a heresy.
That's just heresy.
That's the only way. No, that's the only way. You can't determine.
Okay, well, where does the Church teach that?
It's a common sense thing about Catholicism.
No, you just declared that falsehood on your own authority. It's based on nothing but your own authority. I can prove what Catholic authority teaches, that you can reject as heretical individuals who have not been declared. Pope Paul IV teaches it in his bull Cum Ex Apostolatus Officio. Okay? Pope Leo XIII teaches it in Satis Cognitum. Okay? Pope Pius IX in his decree and declaration on the old Catholics says that they must be regarded as non-Catholics. Not all of them have been declared. That's Catholic teaching. Not what you said.
So basically, you're saying that the individual has the right to declare somebody a heretic, right?
An individual has not only the right, but the obligation to recognize as heretical and heretics people who obstinately dissent from the teaching of the magisterium. If that were not true, you'd have no external unity at all. There are people who claim to be Catholic, at so-called Catholic universities all over the world, who deny Scripture, who deny Jesus Christ's deity, who teach the most ridiculous things about Christianity. According to you, they have to be considered true Christians, true Catholics. That is blasphemy.
Yeah, but
that is idiocy.
Yeah, but that stuff that you just mentioned, like Christ's deity and all that stuff, that was already declared in council. This Vatican II heresy hasn't been declared in council.
Well, wait a second here. There's a fundamental flaw in your argument. So you're admitting that people who embrace things that a council has considered heretical can be considered heretics without a declaration. Correct? So that you're saying that an individual can be considered a heretic without a declaration if the position he holds has already been addressed.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Benedict XVI, the position he holds, that the people who reject the papacy are in the church, has been declared heretical. So he can be considered a heretic without a declaration.
Okay. Well, I don't know.
And see, and that's the thing, that you don't have the internal grace of faith yet. I hope you get it. But you need to pray. You need to look at this. You need to look at the material on our site, because you're going to find the truth when you look at that, because it cuts through the lies. If you're drinking from the well of heretics like Vorus, you're just going to be deceived. There's truth mixed with lies, and actually just pure evil, because he's saying that the men who attack Christ's faith are actually defending it. It's satanic, actually. And he's just an instrument of Satan.
Okay, but from your point, you receive any sacrament from your order that you're in or anything like that? What order are you in? Obviously you're not in the Roman, right? So
we're traditional Catholic Benedictine monks.
Okay, but I mean, your order is it valid? Because obviously there's a big difference if it's valid and invalid. So I'm just saying.
Yes, but I think what you may be asking is, do we have valid priests? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, valid priest.
We don't have a priest.
So you guys, you're basically saying it's better to do what you're doing. You're outside the church. You're not receiving the sacrament.
I'm not outside the church. Okay, I'm not.
Well, you're not in a valid order. You have to be in a valid order.
Yeah.
Christ established that
Yes,
for certain
yes,
people.
we are in a valid order.
Well, you're not in communion with Rome, so it's not valid.
Oh boy, I mean, I guess you haven't understood anything I've said to you.
Yeah, but
Being in communion with Rome means being in communion with the true popes. There have been anti-popes who have ruled in Rome.
True, but
So let me ask you the question: were the people who were rejecting the anti-pope in Rome out of communion with Rome in the past?
No, but I think that issue was a totally different issue.
No. So you therefore rejecting the guy in Rome on the basis that he's not a true pope is not being out of communion with Rome in terms of Catholic Rome. No, it's not. Or the Church of Rome. It's not. So
Okay, but at that time,
you're too attached. You don't understand that there can be a deception. The buildings can be taken over. In the Arian crisis in the 4th century, almost all the bishops became Arian. So the people who were worshiping at their diocese, okay, the diocese was overtaken by a heretical bishop all over the empire. And so you would have said, the people who reject these heretical bishops are outside of the church and outside of the communion of the church. And you would have been opposing St. Athanasius and the remnant Catholics. So you would have been on the side of the devil then, and you're on the side of the devil now.
Let me address on that issue right there. That's actually a good point right there, because during that time when everything was Arian, obviously there's Athanasius that believed in the divinity of Christ and everything, but at that time, before it was addressed in council, those sacraments that they were receiving were valid.
Sacramental, this is an example of your confusion. Sacramental validity is a totally separate issue from heresy.
Okay, but I'm just saying but it's still important to receive the sacraments. It keeps you away from sin. I mean,
I do receive the sacraments on occasion.
Okay, but the thing is, during this time, before the issue was addressed, okay, let me ask you this personal question. Those Arians, before they had that council that says, okay, if you're believing what Arianism is believing, then you're a heretic. But before they had that council, do you think those people were heretics?
Yes, because in the case of Arianism, it is an essential denial of a truth of faith. It denies an essential mystery of faith. And you cannot be Arian in good faith on that topic. And so, yes, people
true,
who...
That's after the council was held, because they did not know.
Wait a second. You asked me if someone who denies, the deity of Christ or embraces Arianism before the council was a heretic. The answer is yes.
In a sense, yes, but however, they didn't have full knowledge, so they're not fully...
No, they did, because you don't understand the distinction. And this, again, you don't know what you're talking about. That's just the truth.
Like I said,
here's the thing. There's a distinction between... You don't have to have a positive knowledge of every single mystery of faith or every single teaching of the church, but you have to know what are called the essential mysteries of faith. All right? No exceptions. That's why no one can be saved without faith in Christ. You must know the Trinity and the Incarnation. And so even if you've never been taught the truth about the Trinity or the Incarnation, if you come to adopt a clear heresy against those truths, such as that there are 4 gods, or such as that Jesus Christ is not true God, you leave the Church of Christ. Even if you've never studied the Council of Nicaea. It doesn't matter, because that's an essential mystery of faith. That's, by the way, also why Benedict XVI and John Paul II could not be material heretics. That's just one reason. Because they embrace things that are contrary to essential mysteries of faith.
Okay, but...
So, I don't know, it's just, there's a lot of bad will there, Jose. A lot of bad will.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, we're going to have a council first to decide.
No, that's heresy. It's not backed up by anything. That's false, untrue, not backed up by anything. And so you blaspheme Jesus Christ by saying that people who deny him are in the church. You blaspheme Jesus Christ by saying that his church can teach that non-Catholics can receive Holy Communion. You blaspheme Jesus Christ by saying that all these facts about what is infallible teaching, even though they clearly would apply to Vatican II, don't apply. That's just a lie. You bear false witness when you say that. and you have nothing to back it up just because you don't want to accept the truth. You'd rather just believe the lie than accept the truth. And so you will remain...
I don't see where you're getting that, because I just told you I reject most of those heretical things that you're talking about. I don't understand why you label me as that.
There are 3 reasons why you're a heretic. 3 reasons. Number 1, you believe in salvation outside the church.
I never even said that.
Yes, you said you believe Jews, etc. can be saved. You said they can't be saved. Here's what you said. They can't be saved except in the case of invincible ignorance, which means they can be saved. Okay? If you were honest, your end result position is they can be saved without faith in Christ. That's heresy. Okay? Heresy. Condemned heresy. Number 2, you hold that a heretic is part of the church because we discussed whether Benedict XVI's statements, according to which the Orthodox are in the church, are heretical. You said yes. Does that make him a heretic? You basically said yes. Okay, but yet you still say he's part of the church. That's heresy. And number 3, you deny infallibility. You deny papal infallibility because you hold that someone you think is a true pope can solemnly, with the fullness of his authority, promulgate heretical teachings. That's heresy.
No, you're the one that believes that.
No, I don't. You're just a liar. Damnable liar. That's what you are. I don't believe that at all. Okay, it's precisely because I believe the Pope is infallible, a true Pope, that I conclude he's not a Pope. He can't be. And then you contradict yourself completely when you said that only a council can declare someone a heretic. You have no authority to declare someone as a heretic. And then I pointed out, well, all these people at universities who deny the deity of Christ, deny Scripture, are they heretics? You said, well, yeah, because you can declare them heretics without a declaration contradicting yourself, because the matters they deny were already addressed. Oh, and then I pointed out, well, Benedict XVI denies matters that were already addressed. The papacy, Protestantism, salvation. He denies all that. Therefore, by your own logic, he would have to be considered a heretic. But no, so you contradict yourself again. That's the truth. That's the truth, but you can't see it because you don't have the grace of faith or honesty.
Let me put my point, though, on this whole issue that's going on right now in the church. I think that all these things that the Pope is saying are heretical, like you're saying, but however, I think God has a guard over the church, and he's keeping them from doing papal statements. He's keeping them from making stuff part of the faith, because I guarantee you all the stuff that's been going on, all the things they've been saying are not part of the faith. I can promise you that.
Well, you're just wrong. They're not part of the faith because they don't have authority. But if they did, they would be, because they have utilized that authority to teach. That's just the truth. That's absolutely proven by the facts I've given you. Only a liar would deny it, and that's what you are. And so your only hope is to start to pray, to look at the material, to really familiarize yourself with this stuff, but honestly. Look at it honestly. And then you might begin to see what's going on. Because you have this misconception that because most people adhere to this phony structure under Benedict XVI, that it's the church. It's not. It's not. You look at the church in a very natural way rather than in a supernatural way. The church is governed by supernatural principles. It's a supernatural institution. Just because a guy dresses up in robes, okay, and people think he's Pope, doesn't mean he is. That's the deception, and that's why God has allowed this, because he wants to sift out people who really are inclined to believe his truth, who are inclined to follow God, rather than a man who's denying God, but falsely claiming to do so in the name of God. So
what do you think I should do then?
I think you should pray the 15-decade rosary each day. I think you should look at our material because you're obviously not very familiar with it. You may have quickly looked at some stuff. You haven't looked at much. That's pretty obvious. You need to watch the videos. Listen to some of our debates. Okay? Watch the full-length video on their heresies. All right? Read some of the sections on the glossary of terms and principles about, magisterium, what it is, papal infallibility. Read some of that stuff. Watch the whole video, The Third Secret of Fatima, The Impostor Sister Lucia, and the End of the World. And so you get to see how it all started with this invalid conspirator, John the 23rd, and how this entity that has arisen is not the Catholic Church. So if you, I think, put more time into looking at what we have to say because it's documented, not with our opinion, but by facts, then you'll start to see the truth if you're sincere at all. But if you're going to listen to the putrid lies of someone like Boris, who's just full of nonsense, the guy, I mean, he's telling you the opposite of what the truth is, then you're going to be deceived. But if you spend more time looking at these videos and these articles and the documentation, and if you're sincere and if you pray for the truth, I think that there's a chance that you'll see that this is true. It is. But right now you have a very cloudy view of what the church is. And also, if you don't embrace the truth on salvation, you have no hope for seeing the truth. You're not convinced that Christ is necessary. This invincible ignorance idea you have is wrong. It's heretical. We have a book on that. It's not traditional. The church traditionally, the fathers of the church, and the popes throughout history did not believe that people who are ignorant of the gospel can be saved. Do you realize that? It's a modernist idea. It's not the traditional teaching of the church. It's not the teaching of the saints. It's heretical. You have to know Christ. He's that necessary. You have to be baptized. Baptism is necessary. There's only one way into the church, and that's through baptism. And so until you have what we call the foundational faith, the belief that Christ is really necessary, baptism is necessary, you won't really think it's a big deal that Benedict XVI is praising non-Christian religions. You'll say, well, it's maybe scandalous, but it's not that big a deal. Whereas if you really had the foundational faith in Christ, you would see that anyone who would do that is an antichrist. You'd never do that if you had the Catholic faith. The fact that they're praising these religions absolutely by itself proves they're outside the church. And so until you have that foundational faith, you won't see it. And also, a lot of people go by what other people say. If you care a lot about what other people say, you'll never serve God. You'll never find the truth, especially today. You have to look at the facts and not care at all what these heretics say, because the people you're probably being influenced by are just total liars. They've never found God. They're totally dominated by human respect, and that's why their conclusions on things are perverted and tainted. So that's what you need to do.
Okay, well, and so where would I be receiving my sacraments?
Well, you shouldn't receive sacraments yet. See, we hear this all the time from people. They just say, where do I go? Where do I go? You cannot receive the sacraments with benefit until you believe correctly. The first rule of salvation is to hold the true faith, whole and undefiled. So you should not receive sacraments. And if I were a priest, I wouldn't even give you communion until you believe correctly, until you've squared away these issues. That's what you need to do. And you need to care more about the faith. It's not just about where you show up at church or where you receive sacraments.
Let me make my point on this. I think, honestly, that you have a lot of pride in yourself, and no matter what anybody says, you're going to try to come up with any document that you can and twist it to your own wording and make you sound right with basically that. And all I'm saying is I do understand that there's something wrong going on in the church, but however, you and I both should stay in the church and fix it from within, because you and I, know deep down inside that this is still a valid church. This is a valid priesthood. There's a valid...
No, it's not. I know absolutely it's not. And furthermore, you say I twist things. False statement. Give me an example. So you can't just say stuff. And it's actually the opposite. What you said about me, that we just say anything to be right, it's what you just said. You just said something to be right you have no backing for whatsoever. That's a lie. That's because you're not of God.
No, but
what I say is true, and yes, I have righteous indignation at people like you, because I can perceive so clearly how you resist the truth, probably much more clearly than you could ever imagine, that you are resisting the truth, and that's what I'm saying to you, and you can call it whatever you want. No, it's simply actually a charitable denunciation of your dishonesty. That's what it is. And so, but you're just a bad will, and the facts refute you. You don't know what you're talking about. You're a heretic. You contradict yourself all the time. You think you understand, but you don't. The facts are there for you to embrace the truth. I've told you what you should do, and your conclusions are baseless. You don't even know what the church is. You're following the anti-church. You've actually left the church. That's the truth, and you are on the road to hell. And so,
okay, well, when I was a few years ago, I was actually doing my confirmation classes, and that's whenever I started to become Catholic. And this is when I started learning about the faith, because before I grew up more in a Baptist home, I would say. And when I started converting, that's when I started learning about the faith. And, I mean, they always taught that, the church is infallible, the teachings of the church are infallible. And I think your points that you're making, okay, they are good points and everything, but you have to understand it to where, like, the papacy, you think that everything they're speaking of, even if they're teaching heretical, you think automatically, okay, well, he's a heretic, so he's outside the church, boom. So, I mean, I don't think it goes down that easily. I think God is protecting his church a little bit harder than that. And I think that it's still there. I think there's going to be bad people all the way until the rapture happens. But I just think that these bad popes or whatever are going to lead people astray.
Well, this is why I said I think you need to read some of the facts, because what you're saying is just, I mean, you're saying that I think whoever's a heretic's outside the church, boom. That's Catholic teaching. Pope Innocent III said that there's one church, okay, not of heretics. Eis exemplo, okay? Leo XIII says, and I'll just quote it, think about what he's saying. The practice of the church has always been the same, as is shown by the unanimous teaching of the fathers, who were wont to hold as outside Catholic communion and alien to the church, which means outside the church, whoever would recede in the least degree from any point of doctrine proposed by her authoritative magisterium. And he goes on to quote Augustine, and he says, Augustine drew up a long list of heresies. St. Augustine notes that other heresies may spring up, to a single one of which, should anyone give his assent, he is by that very fact cut off from Catholic unity. No one who merely disbelieves in all these heresies can for that reason regard himself as a Catholic, or call himself one, for there may be or may arise some other heresies, and if anyone holds to one single one of these heresies, he is not a Catholic, end quote. That is Catholic teaching.
Okay, well, let me ask you this question. Why don't you go to, or try your best to actually convert the old Catholic Church basically back to what it used to be or whatever? This church right now that you're talking about, that's a heretical, no disorder or whatever, why don't you try to reform this church back to the way it was before? And that's what I'm saying the solution is. You're saying your solution is break away, get away from them.
Because it's not the Catholic Church. We try to bring people like you back to the Catholic Church. In that way, what you're saying is correct. But the church itself doesn't need to be converted. It can't be converted. It is the one true church. It is the faithful bride of Christ. It's just been reduced in number. That's all. And the chair is vacant. Just like when a pope dies, there's no pope reigning. The church doesn't cease to exist. So let's say you had in church history a pope, okay, and then he died. And then the chair of Peter's vacant. And then let's just suppose that during that time period when there was no pope, okay, before they could elect a new one, 90% of the faithful fell into heresy. What would happen? Well, the church would still exist, but it would only exist in that 10%. And there would be no pope. That's similar to what has occurred.
Well, I'm pretty sure you're familiar with what happened to Fatima, right? The operation. I guarantee you that you're talking about 7 pages. And I guarantee you're not part of your order of the sediment.
Well, that's another flawed and baseless argument. She says, in Portugal, the dogma of faith will always be preserved. And then we have etc., because the third secret follows. So we don't even know what she said. And in fact, since the indications about what the third secret really contains are that it deals with an apostasy from the faith, okay? From seemingly the highest levels, actually what it could say is, in Portugal, the dogma of faith will always be preserved until the great apostasy, or in a faithful remnant, okay? Or in those truly devoted to me. So that argument proves nothing. We can prove infallibly that this guy's not Pope and that the structure under him is not Catholic. And so that's just the bottom line. You've seen enough facts to come to that conclusion, but you're not honest at this time. I hope you change. You can check out the information on the site, which you probably haven't looked at much, or the videos.
Okay, I'll check this over and I'll be emailing you probably in another month or so, and we'll see. I'll be sending you.
Okay. All right, Jose.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
In the Old Testament, the Ark of the Covenant or Testament was the holiest and most powerful thing on earth outside of God himself. The Ark carried the written word of God, the Ten Commandments, and the miraculous bread from heaven. The Ark of the New Testament, the Blessed Virgin Mary, contained the Word of God, Jesus Christ, the living bread from heaven. The Ark of the Old Covenant contained the rod of Aaron, which signified the true high priest. The Ark of the New Testament contained Jesus Christ, who is called the High Priest in Hebrews 3 verse 1. In Exodus chapter 40 verses 34 and 35 it says that the Ark of the Old Testament was, quote, overshadowed by the presence and power of God. In the New Testament, the Virgin Mary is also, quote, overshadowed by the presence and power of God in Luke chapter 1 verse 35. In 2 Samuel 6 verse 9, David said when the ark came into his presence, quote, how can the ark of the Lord come to me? A few verses later, David leaps before the ark, and it says that the ark remained in the house for 3 months and brought blessings to the whole house. We see the same things happen with the ark of the New Testament, the Virgin Mary, in Luke 1 verse 45 through 57. Elizabeth says to Mary, quote, and how does this happen to me, that the mother of my Lord should come to me? The infant also leaps in Elizabeth's womb, and Mary remains in Elizabeth's home for 3 months. The Ark of the Old Testament was not only covered in gold, but according to Exodus 25:11, it also had a crown of gold. In Apocalypse chapter 11, verse 19 and following, it states that the Ark of the New Testament is a woman wearing a, quote, crown. God specifically commanded that the Ark of the Old Testament be made of setum wood. Setum wood is so extremely durable that the Septuagint, the Greek version of the Old Testament, actually translates this word as, quote, incorruptible or, quote, non-decaying wood. Therefore, the Blessed Virgin Mary must be incorruptible. She does not die. She was preserved from all sin, actual and original, and is assumed into heaven. The Ark of the Old Testament also had awe-striking power over God's enemies. The Ark was so holy that when men failed to show proper respect for the Ark, they died. The Ark carried and represented the spiritual presence of God on earth. When God spoke to Moses, it was from right above the Ark. In our times, God has spoken to the world through the Ark of the New Testament, the Blessed Virgin Mary. Our Lady has appeared many times in order to attempt to convert mankind and tell them what God wants them to do to be saved. In the year 1917, the Blessed Virgin Mary appeared 6 times to 3 little children, Francisco and Jacinta Marto and Lucia de Santos. In her appearances, Our Lady said that the rosary must be prayed every day. Our Lady also said that Jesus wants to establish devotion to her Immaculate Heart in the world, and she promised salvation to those who embrace this devotion. The children asked the Blessed Virgin to work a miracle so that all might believe that she was truly appearing. Our Lady told the children that on October 13, 1917, she would perform a miracle that everyone will have to believe. The night before October 13, 1917, there was a tremendous rainstorm, with rain falling the whole night. People were up to their ankles in mud. On October 13th at noon, the Blessed Virgin appeared to the children. Lucia suddenly told the people in the crowd to shut their umbrellas in the midst of a drenching rain that had turned the area to mud. The miracle then happened. The sun started to make movements outside the laws of nature. The sun appeared to change colors and danced in the sky. It spun rapidly like a gigantic fire wheel. The sun, after 10 minutes, began to plunge towards the earth. Thousands of people in the crowd of 70,000 that had gathered to witness the promised miracle began to cry and fell on the ground thinking the end of the world had come. Right before the sun was about to hit the earth, it reversed direction and went back to its normal position in the sky. Many of the sick were instantly cured. The miracle stunned the gathered multitude, converting hardened unbelievers, including atheists and Freemasons, and confirmed thousands in the Catholic faith. And there was a second miracle, because the muddy ground and everyone's clothes were instantly dried. People shouted, "Miracle, miracle." Later, a scientist examined the ground where the miracle took place and said that the amount of energy needed to dry all the ground and the clothes would take a gigantic bomb being dropped in the area. If a bomb was dropped, of course, all the people in the area would have been killed. So it was truly a miracle worked by the Blessed Virgin. On October 15, 1917, 2 days later, the Masonic and anti-Catholic daily newspaper O Secular declared about the Fatima miracle, quote, "How the sun danced in broad daylight at Fatima, the apparitions of the Virgin, the sign of heaven. Thousands declared a miracle," end quote. The newspaper declared in its headline that Fatima was the sign of heaven. Does that sound familiar? Apocalypse 12, verse 1, quote, "A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun." So the newspaper headline was a confirmation by a public and anti-Catholic source that Our Lady of Fatima's apparitions and the miracle of the sun were indeed the sign and event predicted in Apocalypse 12, verse 1. During her appearances at Fatima, Our Lady revealed 3 secrets to the children. The first secret was a horrifying vision of hell. Our Lady opened her hands once more as she had done the 2 previous months. The rays of light appeared to penetrate the earth, and we saw as it were a sea of fire. Plunged in this fire we saw the demons and souls of the damned. The latter were like transparent burning embers, all blackened or burnished bronze, having human forms. They were floating about in that conflagration, now raised into the air by the flames that issued from within themselves, together with great clouds of smoke. Now they fell back on every side like sparks in huge fires, without weight or equilibrium, amid shrieks and groans of pain and despair, which horrified us and made us tremble with fright. The demons were distinguished from the souls of the damned by their terrifying and repellent likeness to frightful and unknown animals, black and transparent like burning coals. That vision only lasted a moment thanks to our good Heavenly Mother, who at the first apparition had promised to take us to heaven. Without that, I think we would have died of terror and fear. Our Lady said to the children, "You have seen hell, where the souls of poor sinners go. To save them, God wishes to establish in the world devotion to my Immaculate Heart. If what I say to you is done, many souls will be saved, and there will be peace. The war is going to end, but if people do not cease offending God, a worse war will break out during the reign of Pius XI. When you see a night illuminated by an unknown light, know that this is the sign given to you by God, that He is about to punish the world for its crimes by means of war, famine, and persecutions against the Church and against the Holy Father. To prevent this, I shall come to ask for the consecration of Russia to my Immaculate Heart and the communion of reparation on the first Saturdays. If my requests are heeded, Russia will be converted and there will be peace. If not, she will spread her errors throughout the world, causing wars and persecutions against the Church. The good will be martyred, the Holy Father will have much to suffer, various nations will be annihilated. In the end, my Immaculate Heart will triumph, the Holy Father will consecrate Russia to me, and she shall be converted, and a certain period of peace will be granted to the world. In Portugal, the dogma of the faith will always be preserved, etc. Do not tell this to anybody. So the first part of the secret of Fatima was a vision of hell. The second part of the secret was a prediction of World War II if men did not cease offending God. To prevent World War II and the other punishments predicted in the second part of the secret, the Blessed Virgin Mary appeared and gave a message to Lucie on June 13, 1929. Lucie was now a religious sister at a convent in Tui, Spain. The Blessed Virgin told Sister Lucia that the moment has come in which God asked the Holy Father, in union with all the bishops throughout the world, to consecrate Russia to her Immaculate Heart, promising by this means it shall be saved. Pope Pius XI never consecrated Russia, and on January 25, 1938, the skies of Europe at night were illuminated by an unknown light as predicted by Our Lady. People in Switzerland at 11 p.m. at night could read their newspapers outdoors. Sister Lucia confirmed that this strange light was the sign given by God that he was about to punish the whole world. World War II began shortly after this great light was seen, and the second part of the secret was fulfilled. The third part of the secret is the continuation of the words, quote, "In Portugal, the dogma of faith will always be preserved." Many of the facts concerning the chronology of the message of Fatima were discovered by Fatima researcher Frere Michel. While being in the convent of the Dorothean Sisters in June 1943, Sister Lucia became seriously sick, and while Sister Lucia had written down the first two parts of the secret, she still hadn't written down the third secret. Her physical condition was so serious that Bishop de Silva, the Bishop of Fatima, was very concerned. On September 15, 1943, Bishop de Silva traveled to Spain and asked Sister Lucia to write down the third secret, quote, if she really wanted to. Sister Lucia asked the bishop for a formal written order. In mid-October 1943, Bishop de Silva gave Sister Lucia a formal order to write down the third secret. Sister Lucia, over the next 3 months, would try to write down the third secret. She found herself in a terrible anguish, and each time she tried to write down the third secret, she felt something that was preventing her from writing down the third secret. After 3 months of this crisis, the Blessed Virgin Mary appeared on January 2, 1944, and told Sister Lucia that it was indeed God's will that she write down the third secret. The following day, she wrote down the third secret, and it was delivered to Bishop de Silva. Bishop de Silva could have read the third secret at once, but he decided not to because he was scared at the responsibility of having the knowledge of its contents. Sister Lucia made Bishop de Silva promise that, quote, the third secret would be open and read to the world upon her death or in 1960, whatever would happen first, end quote. In 1946, Sister Lucia was asked why it was necessary to wait until 1960, and she responded, quote, because the Blessed Virgin wishes it so, and, quote, it would become clear at that time. The Holy Office at the Vatican demanded the text of the third secret in 1957. Bishop Venancio, Bishop de Silva's auxiliary bishop, pleaded with Bishop de Silva to finally read the third secret. De Silva refused, so Venancio decided to hold the envelope containing the third secret up to the light, and said that the third secret was about 20 to 25 lines long. On April 16, 1957, the third secret arrived in Rome. The evidence seems to indicate that Pope Pius XII was going to wait until 1960 to read the third secret, but ended up dying on October 9, 1958. So the whole world waited in 1960 for the Vatican to release the third secret, and on February 8, 1960, the Vatican announced in a press release that the third secret would not be revealed. The only reason that the Vatican wouldn't release the third secret was because it was embarrassing to the Vatican. Some might ask the question that even if the Vatican said they wouldn't be revealing the third secret to the public in 1960, why didn't Sister Lucia herself tell the whole world what the third secret really was? We will present the evidence that we believe clearly indicates that the real Sister Lucia was killed and was replaced by an imposter Sister Lucia, most likely between 1958 and 1959. If Sister Lucia was replaced by an imposter, wouldn't Sister Lucia's friend Bishop de Silva notice the imposter? Not if Sister Lucia was replaced in 1958 or 1959, because a few months after the Vatican received the third secret in 1957, Bishop de Silva died. Although Sister Lucia met with people rarely, she met with Father Agustin Fuentes on December 26, 1957. Father Agustin Fuentes was the chief postulator for the causes of Francisco and Jacinta's beatification. This was the reason that Sister Lucia met with him. Father Fuentes, after he spoke to Sister Lucia, went back to his home country of Mexico, and on May 22, 1958, he gave a talk about what Sister Lucia said to him when he visited her. Father Fuentes said that Sister Lucia, when he met her, was, quote, very sad, very pale, and emaciated. Sister Lucia told Father Fuentes, quote, God will chastise the world, and this will be in a terrible manner. The punishment from heaven is imminent. Father, how much time is there before 1960 arrives? It will be very sad for everyone. Not one person will rejoice at all if beforehand the world does not pray and do penance. I am not able to give any other details because it is still a secret. This is the part of the message of Our Lady which will remain secret until 1960. Sister Lucia went on to say, quote, my mission is not to indicate to the world the material punishments which are certain to come if the world does not pray and do penance beforehand. No, my mission is to indicate to everyone the imminent danger we are in of losing our souls for all eternity if we remain obstinate in sin. It is necessary for each one of us to begin to reform himself spiritually. Each person must not only save his own soul, but all the souls that God has placed on our path. The devil is in the mood for engaging in a decisive battle against the Virgin, and a decisive battle is the final battle, where one side will be victorious and the other side will suffer defeat. Hence, from now on we must choose sides. Either we are for God or we are for the devil. There is no other possibility. God is giving two last remedies to the world. These are the Holy Rosary and devotion to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. These are the last two remedies which signify that there will be no others. The Most Holy Virgin in these last times in which we live has given a new efficacy to the recitation of the Rosary, to such an extent that there is no problem, no matter how difficult it is, even of the life of peoples and nations, that we cannot resolve by the prayer of the Holy Rosary. With the Holy Rosary, we will save ourselves, we will sanctify ourselves, we will console our Lord and obtain the salvation of many souls. Finally, devotion to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, our Most Holy Mother, consists in considering her as the seat of mercy, of goodness, and of pardon, and as the certain door by which we are to enter heaven. Sister Lucia told Father Fuentes that the Blessed Virgin Mary made her understand that we are living in the last days of the world. After Father Fuentes' talk in which he related what Sister Lucia had told him, the talk was published in magazines throughout the whole world. About a year later, on July 2, 1959, Sister Lucia's Diocese of Coimbra officially came out and accused Father Fuentes of lying about what Sister Lucia said to him during their interview. They published a letter produced on a typewriter that stated, quote, Father Augustin Fuentes, postulator of the cause of beatification for the seers of Fatima, visited Sister Lucia at the Carmel of Coimbra and spoke to her exclusively about things concerning the process in question. But after returning to Mexico, this priest allowed himself to make sensational declarations of an apocalyptic, eschatological, and prophetic character, which he declares that he heard from Sister Lucia's very lips. Given the gravity of such statements, the Chancery of Coimbra believed its duty to order a rigorous investigation on the authenticity of such news, but also with regard to things reported as having been said by Sister Lucia. The Diocese of Coimbra has decided to publish these words of Sister Lucia, given in answer to questions put by one who has the right to do so. Sister Lucia, quote, Father Fuentes spoke to me in his capacity as postulator for the causes of beatification of the servants of God Jacinta and Francisco Marto. We spoke solely on things connected with this subject. Therefore, whatever else he refers to is neither exact nor true. I am sorry about it, for I do not understand what good can be done for souls when it is not based on God who is the truth. I know nothing, and could therefore say nothing about such punishments which are falsely attributed to me. The Chancery of Coimbra is in a position to declare that since up to the present Sister Lucia has said everything she believed it her duty to say about Fatima. She has said nothing new, and consequently has authorized nobody, at least since February 1955, to publish anything new that might be attributed to her on the subject of Fatima, end quote. It was after this letter was published by the Diocese of Coimbra that Father Fuentes was removed as postulator for the beatification causes of Francisco and Jacinta. On March 19, 1961, Father Louis Condor, a priest from the communist country of Hungary, was appointed to take over for Father Fuentes. So by July 2, 1959, Sister Lucia's diocese was publishing letters in her name that were false. Sister Lucia was silenced, and it was probably at this same time that the real Sister Lucia had died or was killed. It's very likely that the impostor Sister Lucia was installed around this time. This was a woman who looked somewhat like Sister Lucia. She was probably a communist agent or a paid actress. She could have also been asked or blackmailed to play the part of Sister Lucia. And once she began publicly acting as if she were Sister Lucia, she became comfortable with it, and it became her way of life. And after she did this for some time, it was too late to turn back. Our monastery, Most Holy Family Monastery, was the first organization in the world to publicly mention the concept of an impostor Sister Lucia, and to bring out the evidence supporting this idea. When we posted our article, The Whole Truth About the Consecration and Conversion of Russia and the Impostor Sister Lucy, we have to remember from Sister Lucia's own words that she did not seem to know when she would die. Otherwise, Sister Lucia would have never had Bishop de Silva promise that the third secret would be open and read to the whole world at her death or in 1960, whichever would come first. So Sister Lucia didn't know if she would live till 1960. We also know that once January 1st, 1960 arrived, Sister Lucia would begin to tell anyone and everyone she could about what the message of the third secret really was. As we have seen in its note of July 2nd, 1959, the Chancery of Coimbra declared authoritatively that, quote, Sister Lucia has nothing more to say on Fatima, end quote. It also became increasingly difficult to see her, and for years no more of her writings were published. Her testimony was becoming bothersome. Interestingly enough, Sister Lucia's confessor, Father Aparico, when he came back from Brazil in 1960, was unable to see Sister Lucia. He remarked, quote, I have not been able to speak with Sister Lucia because the Archbishop could not give the permission to meet her. The conditions of isolation in which she finds herself have been imposed by the Holy See. Consequently, no one may speak with her without a license from Rome. This permission to see Sister Lucia could only be given by two people, either by John the 23rd or by the Cardinal Prefect of the Holy Office. The reason why only two people could give special permission to see Sister Lucia by 1960 was because by 1960 you were not dealing with a real Sister Lucia herself. You were dealing with the impostor Sister Lucia, as we prove in our information on John the 23rd, and in the conclusion section on our video, Vatican II, Council of Apostasy, the evidence indicates that John the 23rd was a Freemason. John the 23rd encyclical, September 26, 1959, quote, Our thoughts turn to the lands of this earth. We see all mankind striving for a better future. We see the awakening of a mysterious force, and this permits us to hope that men will be drawn by a right conscience and a sense of duty to advance the real interests of human society. As mentioned in our video, Abortion, Rock Music, and Freemasonry Exposed, the term mysterious force was the original name for Freemasonry. We believe that John the 23rd, by making this statement, was promoting the awakening of Freemasonry throughout the whole world. On November 19, 1959, John the 23rd had an audience in which he spoke about Sister Lucia. John the 23rd stated about this meeting, quote, We talked at length about the seer of Fatima, today a good religious at Coimbra. The Holy Office will take care of everything and keep it on the right lines, end quote. In other words, John the 23rd and his fellow conspiratorial agents will continue to hide the truth about the third secret and the newly installed impostor Sister Lucia. The impostor Sister Lucia made her first public appearance on May 13, 1967 with Paul VI. People who have seen the video of Paul VI's visit to Fatima say that he didn't even pray one Hail Mary. Here are the pictures of the real Sister Lucia from 1945 when she was 38 years old. You can judge for yourself, but the woman pictured here is not the same as the woman pictured before. First, this photograph is from 1967. Thus, this is supposedly Sister Lucia 22 years later, at age 60. But this woman looks as young, or even younger than Sister Lucia when she was 38 years old. Despite showing signs of age, from age 38 to age 60, a person will essentially look the same. In addition to the differences in appearance, the other thing that we notice is that the imposter Sister Lucia's teeth are normal and are not irregular. But when we look at the real Sister Lucia's teeth, we can see that her teeth were large, projecting, and irregular. We also see from this photograph that the imposter Sister Lucia seems to be wearing lipstick. This is something that we believe the real Sister Lucia would never do. Another thing to notice is that the chin of the real Sister Lucia is much shorter, and the chin of the imposter Sister Lucia is much longer. When the real Sister Lucia smiles, her mouth forms a U. When the imposter Sister Lucia smiles, her face forms an upside-down U. Some might ask the question, why didn't Sister Lucia's relatives notice the imposter Sister Lucia? In a traditional Catholic Carmelite convent, when a sister meets with visitors, she meets them at the grate or the grill. The grill or the grate is an obstacle to seeing the person on the other side perfectly. When the sister goes to meet visitors, she will wear what's called a great veil. The grate or the grill also has shutters and a curtain. The curtain is put down so that the sister cannot see the visitors. They cannot make out the exact features of the religious sister at all. They can only see a silhouette and hear the voice of the sister. The only time that the curtain was removed was when the sister was meeting with her family. But an easy way that Sister Lucia's family members wouldn't notice the imposter was if the superior ordered that the curtain not be removed even for visits with her family. This is probably all that would be needed for her family not to notice the imposter, but even this might not have been needed. The superior of the Carmelite convent at that time was probably in on the conspiracy dealing with the imposter Sister Lucia. The family visits allowed for sisters at Carmelite convents were usually once a year. The usual time for the visit was 1 hour. We don't even know if during the late 1950s, when we believe the imposter was implanted, that Sister Lucia's relatives even saw her once a year. According to the particular rules of the convent Sister Lucia joined, even her close relatives were not allowed to see her close up. Also, the superior would be present with Sister Lucia when she met with a visitor. If a few years passed in which her family members didn't visit her, they might not have picked up on the imposter Sister Lucia. Most people remember what their close relatives look like by looking at photographs, and people remember what their close relatives sound like by talking to them on the phone. Sister Lucia's closest relatives did not speak to Sister Lucia on the telephone probably at all during that time, and photographs of Sister Lucia were probably not available and not kept by her closest family members. As many years pass without seeing your relatives, and without being reminded of what they look like, principally by photographs, most people would not even remember what their close relatives exactly look like. We only know of about 10 photos taken of Sister Lucia. These few photos were probably not even seen by her own family members. If you don't have any photographs of your relatives, how do you remember them? By your memories of what they look like. But in the case of Sister Lucia, there were almost no memories. Sister Lucia went into a boarding school in 1921, 4 years after the apparitions of Our Lady at Fatima. Then in 1928, Sister Lucia entered the Dorothean Sisters in Tui, Spain. Then in 1946, Sister Lucia entered the Carmelite convent in Coimbra, Portugal. We have no idea how often her family ever got to see her at the convent, so her family members didn't really get to know their sister that well. So far, we have shown evidence as to why we believe an imposter Sister Lucia took over for the real Sister Lucia around the late 1950s. Therefore, the letters of the impostor Sister Lucia from the 1960s to the year 2000 would contain handwriting that would be at least slightly different from the real Sister Lucia. Here we can see letters from the real Sister Lucia, December 17, 1927, May 29, 1930, November 17, 1935. You can see that the lowercase g has a distinctive loop. And when we look at the impostor Sister Lucia's letter of April 13, 1980, we can see that her G is looped differently. Here we see the capital S, a letter from December 17, 1927, a letter of May 29, 1930, a letter of November 17, 1935. And here we see a letter from the impostor Sister Lucia of April 13, 1980, and a letter from July 13, 1989. The capital S in these letters of 1980 and 1989 by the impostor Sister Lucia are definitely different than the real Sister Lucia's capital S. In 1992, 3 individuals interviewed the impostor Sister Lucia. They asked her about John Paul II's 1984 consecration of the world to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, and whether this fulfilled Our Lady's request for the Pope to consecrate Russia to her Immaculate Heart. They also asked her about the third secret of Fatima. All 3 individuals believed that this was the real Sister Lucia. This interview was later published in a book called 2 Hours with Sister Lucia. Here is a portion of the interview. Question: and was this consecration accomplished by John Paul II on March 25th of 1984? Sister Lucia: yes, 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 in a low affirmative voice, which also seemed to show that she was expecting this question. Question: so this consecration was then accepted by Our Lady? Sister Lucia: yes. Question: Our Lady is content and has accepted it? Sister Lucia: yes. Question: does God and Our Lady still want the Church to reveal the third secret? Sister Lucia: the third secret is not intended to be revealed. It was only intended for the Pope and the immediate church hierarchy. Question: but didn't Our Lady say that it was to be revealed to the public by 1960 at the latest? Sister Lucia: Our Lady never said that. Our Lady said it was for the Pope. Question: can the Pope reveal the third secret? Sister Lucia: the Pope can reveal it if he chooses to, but I advise him not to. If he chooses to, I advise great prudence. He must be prudent. I had the opportunity to speak at length with one of the 3 individuals that was involved in this 1992 interview. He expressed to me that there seemed to be something very troubling and wrong with Sister Lucia. This 1992 interview by itself proves that there was an impostor Sister Lucia. As we have clearly shown at the beginning of this tape, the real Sister Lucia said that the third secret is to be revealed to the whole world by 1960. The impostor Sister Lucia contradicts this by stating that the third secret should not be revealed, and that it was only intended for the Pope. She also contradicts the real Sister Lucia by stating that the third secret was not to be revealed by 1960. Some have attempted to discredit this 1992 interview by pointing out that Sister Lucia was always behind the grill, but in this interview she was supposedly out in the open. But this makes sense. The Vatican only allowed one selective interview to an individual group, with Sister Lucia out in the open and not behind the grill, in which she would tell them, and thus the world, that John Paul II successfully consecrated Russia, so that it would be on the record with an independent group. But when Sister Lucia was to meet with her sister, who could have more easily identified that she was an impostor, she was always kept behind the grill and with many other nuns. The impostor Sister Lucia made her last public appearance on May 13, 2000. On this day, John Paul II directed Cardinal Sodano to make an announcement as to what the Vatican believed is the interpretation of the third secret. Sodano announced that the third secret was a vision, not words, and that it had to be interpreted in a symbolic key. Sodano announced that the Vatican's interpretation of the third secret was approved by John Paul II and Sister Lucia. Sodano announced that the interpretation of the third secret is the atheistic war on God's church in the 20th century, which culminated in the attempted assassination of John Paul II on May 13, 1981. The impostor Sister Lucia, who was present, did clearly confirm the interpretation of the phony third secret by making undeniable gestures of approval as Sedano made this announcement. Every traditionalist who doesn't accept the Vatican's version of the third secret of Fatima already believes that there was an impostor Sister Lucia, but simply hasn't figured it out yet or isn't honest enough to admit it. You can't have it both ways. You can't reject the Vatican's phony version of the third secret unless you also reject this, quote, Sister Lucia as an impostor. Sedano announced that John Paul II ordered the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, headed up by none other than Joseph Ratzinger, now Benedict XVI, to make public the vision of the third secret with an appropriate commentary. On June 26, 2000, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith made public what they claimed was the third secret. The Vatican said that the third secret was a vision in which a pope dressed in white, who is interpreted by the Vatican to be John Paul II, is killed. The first problem here is that the vision says that a pope is killed, and John Paul II was not killed. In the vision, many martyrs are killed, and their blood is gathered up and sprinkled on souls. The second problem here is that the Bible and the Catholic Church teach that justification happens by the sprinkling of Christ's blood on souls. Pope St. Leo the Great, Dogmatic Letter to Flavian, Council of Chalcedon 451, quote, "Let him heed what the blessed apostle preaches, that sanctification by the Spirit is effected by the sprinkling of Christ's blood." And the Bible teaches this also in 1 John 1 verse 7. "The blood of Jesus Christ his Son cleanseth us from all sin." So justification happens by the sprinkling of Christ's blood, not man's blood. All these things show us that this so-called third secret is phony and a deception of the Antichrist. It makes sense that John Paul II would be behind this deception, considering that John Paul II preached that every man was God. As we prove in our video, John Paul II preached the gospel of the Antichrist, that every man is God. The real third secret is the continuation of the words of Our Lady, quote, "In Portugal, the dogma of the faith will always be preserved. But in this phony third secret, there are no words from the Virgin Mary, just a vision." The real third secret was also written in letter form and addressed and signed on a piece of paper with margins on each side of 3/4 of a centimeter. The Vatican's June 26, 2000, quote, third secret, is not written in letter form, is not addressed or signed, and the sheets of paper have no margins. In addition to this, there are other problems. For example, we see the letters JMJ, which are on the Vatican's version of the third secret, which they claim were written by Sister Lucia in 1944. But here we have the same letters JMJ, written by the real Sister Lucia on December 17, 1927. We can see the huge difference. These letters with JMJ are supposedly written by the same person, Sister Lucia, and less than 20 years apart. Also look at the way the Vatican claims Sister Lucia wrote the word tui in 1944 in their version of the third secret. Now look at the way that the real Sister Lucia wrote the word tui on May 29, 1930. There is supposedly only a difference of about 13.5 years between these two letters written by Sister Lucia, but we see the big difference in the way the word tui is written. We saw earlier how the real Sister Lucia wrote down a capital S in her letters from December 17, 1927, May 29, 1930, and November 17, 1935. And we saw how the impostor Sister Lucia wrote down a capital S in her letters from April 13, 1980, and July 13, 1989, and we saw the big differences. Now we look at the version of the third secret released by the Vatican, and look at the way that they claim Sister Lucia wrote down a capital S while writing down the third secret in 1944. We again see the huge difference from the real Sister Lucia and how she wrote down a capital S. In fact, this capital S that we are looking at is from the real Sister Lucia, written on November 17, 1935. According to the Vatican, these two letters are only about 8 years apart, and written by the same person, Sister Lucia. but yet we see the gigantic difference in the way the capital S is written. There is also nothing in this phony third secret of the Vatican that would become clear in 1960. And we know what the real Sister Lucia clearly stated, that the third secret would become clear in 1960. We believe that all the evidence proves that the Vatican's version of the third secret is a total fraud. As can be seen on the Vatican's official website, they try to reinforce to the whole world that Sister Lucia has confirmed their version of the third secret. The Vatican states on their website that Archbishop Bertone presented 2 envelopes to Sister Lucia, the first containing the second, which held the third part of the secret of Fatima. They state, quote, immediately touching it with her fingers, she said, quote, "This is my letter." And then while reading it, quote, "This is my writing." The Vatican then states that Sister Lucia was asked who was the principal figure in the vision of the third secret. Quote, "Is the principal figure in the vision the Pope?" Sister Lucia replied at once that it was. The reason why all of this was done and stated on the Vatican's official website was to attempt to reinforce to the whole world that the third secret that the Vatican was presenting was the authentic one, and that the principal figure was John Paul II. Joseph Ratzinger, the then head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, was the one who wrote the official commentary for the third secret. Ratzinger then commented on the first vision of the third secret, which was the vision of hell, where Our Lady said, "You have seen hell, where the souls of poor sinners go. To save them, God wishes to establish in the world devotion to my Immaculate Heart." Ratzinger then comments on the vision and states that, quote, according to Matthew 5 verse 8, the Immaculate Heart is a heart which, with God's grace, has come to perfect interior unity, and therefore sees God. To be devoted to the Immaculate Heart of Mary means therefore to embrace this attitude of heart. Ratzinger states the heresy that any just person can have the Immaculate Heart. According to Ratzinger, it isn't only possessed by the Blessed Virgin Mary. Ratzinger says at the end of his commentary that Fatima is over. He states, quote, "First of all, we must affirm with Cardinal Sodano the events to which the third part of the secret of Fatima refers now seem part of the past. Insofar as individual events are described, they belong to the past. Those who expected exciting apocalyptic revelations about the end of the world or the future course of history are bound to be disappointed." But these words here by Ratzinger, where he states that the third secret does not contain anything about the end of the world, contradict his own words in 1984, when he stated that the third secret does speak about the end of the world. Joseph Ratzinger, now Benedict XVI, gave a famous interview on November 11, 1984 to the Jesus magazine, where he said that the third secret concerns, quote, "the dangers threatening the faith and the life of the Christian, and therefore the life of the world, and the importance of the last things at the end of the world." Every word of the interview that Ratzinger gave was approved of by Ratzinger before being published. So what is the message that is contained in the real third secret of Fatima? The following are statements by people who have claimed to know the essence of what the message in the third secret really is. Cardinal Sciappi, papal theologian of Pope Pius XII, said about the third secret, quote, "In the third secret it is foretold, among other things, that the great apostasy in the Church will begin at the top." At the University of Vienna on September 10, 1984, the one-time Bishop of Fatima, Bishop Cosme do Admiral, gave the following answer to a question about the third secret, quote, "Its content concerns only our faith." Father Gomer de Pau attended Vatican Council II as an advisor. He was given a copy of what was claimed to be the text of the third secret. He said the copy of the third secret he read contained a future prediction by the Blessed Virgin of an almost unbelievable apostasy in the Church. He said that word got out among journalists that a copy of the text of the third secret was floating around. Reporters asked Father de Pau whether this was the real third secret. Father de Pau accepted this text as authentic after he attempted to ask key people at the Vatican if this text, which claimed to be the third secret, was true. The Vatican didn't deny the authenticity of this text, and they didn't want to say anything about it. Father de Paul said that Vatican officials wouldn't want to admit that something like what is predicted in the text he read could possibly happen in the church. Cardinal Silvio Odi said, quote, "The third secret is not about a supposed conversion of Russia, but regards the revolution in the Catholic Church. The Blessed Virgin was alerting us against apostasy in the Church. So many innovations were born at Vatican II that they appear to constitute a true internal revolution." On March 17, 1990, in a magazine called El Sabato in Rome, Italy, Cardinal Odi made the following statements after being asked about the contents of the third secret. Odi said, quote, "I believe I knew John the 23rd quite well, since I spent a number of years at his side. If the secret had concerned realities consoling for the Church, like the conversion of Russia or the religious rebirth of Eastern Europe, I believe that he would have brought pressure to bear to make the secret public. By temperament, he did not hesitate to communicate joyful things. It has been revealed that Cardinal Roncalli in a number of letters to friends practically announced his election to the papacy. But when I asked him during an audience why in 1960 he had not made public the last part of the message of Fatima, he responded with a weary sigh. He then said, quote, "Don't bring that subject up with me, please." Cardinal Odi continued speaking, saying, quote, "What happened in 1960 that might have been seen in connection with the secret of Fatima? The most important event is, without a doubt, the launching of the preparatory phase of the Second Vatican Council. I would not be surprised if the third secret alluded to dark times for the Church, grave confusions and troubling apostasies within Catholicism itself. If we consider the grave crisis we have lived through since the Council, the signs that this prophecy has been fulfilled do not seem to be lacking." In the same interview, Cardinal Silvio Odi was asked the question, quote, "Did you ever speak with Sister Lucia?" He responded, quote, "Yes, in 1985 I had gone to Portugal to celebrate solemnly the anniversary of the apparitions, and I did not resist the desire to exchange a few words with her. Obviously, I did not ask her to reveal the secret to me, but I asked her if she was aware of the reason why the Church had decided not to make it public. And Sister Lucia, what did she say?" Cardinal Odi responded, quote, "She said that in May 1982 she had spoken about it with John Paul II, who had made a pilgrimage to Fatima to render thanks to Our Lady a year after the attempted assassination in St. Peter's Square. Together they had decided that it was more opportune not to reveal the secret, for fear, she explained to me, that it might be misinterpreted. So we see in this published interview with Cardinal Odi an independent, unbiased confirmation of what the impostor Sister Lucia said in her 1992 interview, that the third secret is not intended to be revealed to the public. We also see Cardinal Odi stating that Vatican II was the likely fulfillment of what is predicted in the third secret, because of the critical preparations that were taking place in 1960 in anticipation of Vatican II. Vatican Council II was announced by John the 23rd on January 25, 1959. The ante-preparatory phase of Vatican Council II began May 2, 1959. The work of the Commission ended on May 1, 1960, and the preparatory phase of Vatican Council II began June 5, 1960, with 10 commissions. So the only major news in the Catholic world in the year 1960, the year the Blessed Virgin told the real Sister Lucia that the third secret was to be revealed to the whole world, was that major preparations were taking place for a huge council that was just called for by John the 23rd. When John the 23rd called Vatican II on January 25, 1959, it was the exact same month and day 21 years earlier that great lights were seen throughout Europe, which were the announcement that the punishments predicted in the second part of the secret were about to take place. So it was no accident that John the 23rd called Vatican II on the same month and day, because it was the great announcement of the soon-to-be fulfilled great apostasy mentioned in the third secret. In the conclusion of Vatican II Council of Apostasy, we show information that seems to indicate that Cardinal Giuseppe Siri from Genoa, Italy, was lawfully elected Pope during the conclave on October 26, 1958. On that 26th day of October, white smoke billowed from the Sistine Chapel for 5 minutes. White smoke indicates that a pope has been elected. This was reported on radio and in newspapers throughout the whole world. Vatican Radio announced, quote, "The smoke is white. There is absolutely no doubt a pope has been elected," end quote. Vatican Radio also said that the other cardinals were probably going through the rites for accepting the new pope. Then after 5 minutes, no pope emerged, and the white smoke turned to black smoke. At the same time in the Sistine Chapel, Cardinal Siri had just been elected and accepted the election. But then Siri was threatened in various ways not to assume the office of the papacy. Malachi Martin said that a note was passed to Siri after he accepted the election, which contained various threats that would be carried out if Siri assumed the office of Pope. Siri was reported to then have asked the other cardinals to vote again, so that he might be totally sure that it was indeed the will of God that he is to be Pope. The cardinals then went back to voting for a Pope, and 2 days later the Masonic infiltrator and apostate John the 23rd emerged, claiming to be Pope. Since Siri was pressed not to accept the election, the subsequent election of John the 23rd was invalid by that fact alone. John the 23rd was therefore an anti-pope. John the 23rd held a secretive, multi-hour post-election meeting with all the participants in the conclave. These reports are also confirmed by Alden Hatch in his 1963 book on John the 23rd, called A Man Named John. On page 163 he states, quote, "John the 23rd asked the cardinals to remain in the conclave another night, instead of leaving immediately as was customary, to caution them again against revealing the secrets of his election to outsiders," end quote. On May 18, 1985, Louis Remy spoke to Cardinal Siri at Genoa, Italy. Remy asked various questions to Siri. Siri was asked a question about the 1958 conclave. Siri answered the question, quote, "No." Remy continued, quote, "Some Moments later, when we asked him whether he had been elected pope, his reaction was completely different. He started by remaining silent for a long time, then raised his eyes to heaven, joined his hands and said, quote, "I am bound by the secret." Then, after a long silence, heavy for us all, he said again, quote, "I am bound by the secret. This secret is horrible. I would have books to write about the different conclaves. Very serious things have taken place, but I can say nothing." Remy and the others who were present then believed that Siri was definitely elected pope. Cardinal Siri believed that he was bound by the oath of absolute secrecy that all cardinals take prior to entering the conclave. The penalty for disclosing anything about what happens during a lawful conclave is automatic excommunication. Siri believed that he was bound till death to keep the secrets of the conclave, not realizing that he wasn't bound not to reveal what happened in the conclave, because the rules of the conclave had already been broken, and the supreme office of the church was at stake. The Catholic Encyclopedia of 1907 states that a valid abdication of a pope must be a free act, hence a forced resignation of the papacy would be null and void. Canon 185 of the 1917 Code of Canon Law says the same thing, stating that resignation is invalid by law if it was made out of grave fear unjustly inflicted or fraud. A long-time dream of Freemasonry was to put their own man on the chair of St. Peter. Freemasonry believed it had accomplished its goal when Angelo Roncalli emerged from the October 1958 conclave claiming to be Pope John the 23rd. We will now briefly cover some of the information that indicates that Angelo Roncalli, John the 23rd, was a Freemason and was praised by top-ranking Freemasons throughout the whole world. The Grand Master of the Grand Orient Lodge of Italy stated in an interview with 30 Days magazine that, quote, "As for that, it seems that John the 23rd was initiated into a Masonic lodge in Paris and participated in the work of the Istanbul workshops." Mary Ball Martinez was an accredited member of the Vatican Press Group. She wrote that French Republican guards observed from their posts the then nuncio Angelo Roncalli in civilian clothes, leaving his residence to attend Thursday evening meetings of the Grand Orient Masonic Lodge of France. The high-ranking Freemason Carl Jacob Burckhardt wrote, quote, "I know Cardinal Roncalli very well. He was a deist and a rationalist, whose strength did not lie in the ability to believe in miracles and to venerate the sacred. When Angelo Roncalli was made a, quote, cardinal, he insisted upon receiving his cardinal's hat from the atheist and notoriously anti-clerical socialist Vincent Auriol, president of France, whom Roncalli described as, quote, an honest socialist. At social functions in Paris, Roncalli was frequently seen socializing with the Soviet ambassador, even though the Russian government had resumed its pre-war policy of brutal extermination of Catholics in Russia. Roncalli was also known as a, quote, good friend and confidant of Edward Herriot, secretary of the anti-Catholic Radical Socialists of France. John the 23rd encyclical Pacem in Terris, number 14, April 11th, 1963, quote, "Also among man's rights is that of being able to worship God in accordance with the right dictates of his own conscience, and to profess his religion both in private and in public. This is heresy. It is not man's right to worship false gods. This is the heresy of religious liberty. This has been condemned by many popes." Pacem in Terris was praised by Masonic leaders themselves as a Masonic document. The official organ of the Supreme Council of the 33rd Degree Scottish Rite Masons of Mexico stated in their bulletin in May 1963, quote, "The light of the great architect of the universe enlightens the Vatican. In democratic and communist countries, Pacem in Terris has been universally praised. The encyclical Pacem in Terris is a vigorous statement of Masonic doctrine. We do not hesitate to recommend its thoughtful reading." In a book published by the Knights Templar Freemasons, they said, quote, "The direction of our action, continuation of the work of John the 23rd, and all those who have followed him on the way to Templar Universalism." The 33rd degree Freemason Yves Marsudin said about John the 23rd, quote, "With all our hearts we support the revolution of John the 23rd. Shortly after being elected an antipope and moving into the Vatican, John the 23rd found an ancient statue of Hippolytus, an antipope of the 3rd century. He had the statue restored and placed at the entrance of the Vatican Library. John the 23rd said, quote, "If I were born a Muslim, I believe that I would have always stayed a good Muslim, faithful to my religion." John the 23rd also did things like stopping his car so that he could bless Jews leaving their, quote, Sabbath worship. To a recently baptized Jewish boy, John the 23rd said, quote, "By becoming a Catholic, you do not become less a Jew."
Well met, Gilbert.
John the 23rd was also the first claimant to the papacy to receive at the Vatican a Buddhist religious leader and a Shinto high priest. John the 23rd wanted the clergy of the, quote, Orthodox Church, many of whom were KGB agents, to participate at Vatican II. The, quote, Orthodox said that their clergy would attend, provided that there was no condemnation of communism at Vatican II. John the 23rd agreed not to condemn communism at Vatican II, and so the, quote, Orthodox schismatics came to the council. This was referred to as the Vatican-Moscow Agreement. After the death of John the 23rd, numerous documents from communists, Masons, and Jews were sent to the Vatican expressing their sorrow for John the 23rd. People like Fidel Castro and Nikita Khrushchev sent messages of praise and sorrow. Charles Riandi was a sovereign grand master of secret societies. He said, quote, "To the memory of Angelo Roncalli, Pope under the name of John the 23rd, who has deigned to give us his benediction, his understanding, and his protection." Angelo Roncalli took the name John the 23rd. The name John had been deliberately avoided by popes for 500 years because the last man to have taken it was the infamous John the 23rd of the Great Western Schism. There are incredible parallels between the recent antipope John the 23rd and the antipope John the 23rd who reigned during the Great Western Schism. Both John the 23rds called a false ecumenical council in the 4th year of their reigns. Both antipope John the 23rd's reign spanned 5 years, and both ended shortly before the 3rd session of their false councils. We believe that the similarities between the first antipope John the 23rd and the second are not merely coincidences. The first antipope John the 23rd was also the last antipope to reign from Rome. Was Angelo Roncalli the recent antipope John the 23rd by taking that name, indicating symbolically that he is continuing in the line of antipopes to reign from Rome? Giovanni Montini succeeded John the 23rd when he was elected antipope Paul VI on June 21, 1963. Paul VI created a whole new rite for ordaining priests and bishops on June 18, 1968. Paul VI completely destroyed the rite of ordination. He deleted specific prayers and ceremonies that were part of the traditional rite of ordination. In fact, the prayers that Paul VI deleted were almost identical to the ones that the Anglican Church deleted after they broke away from the Catholic Church. Pope Leo XIII, in his bull Apostolicae Curiae of September 13, 1896, declared that the Anglican Church's rite of ordination is invalid. Therefore, the new rite of ordination of Paul VI should also be considered invalid. The Anglican Church also abolished the subdiaconate and minor orders of the priesthood and replaced them with a ministry in 3 degrees, bishops, priests, and deacons. And Paul VI did the exact same thing. On April 3, 1969, Paul VI, with the help of 6 Protestant ministers, created a new Mass, which was the predicted end-of-the-world attempt by the devil to cause the sacrifice of the Mass to cease on planet Earth. It was the devil's attempt to destroy forever the traditional Catholic Roman rite of the Mass. Paul VI's new Mass changed the Mass from Latin to English. It turned the priests around to face the people, and communion was given in the hand, and Mass was celebrated on a table instead of on an altar. These same things were also seen in the Anglican liturgy when they broke away from the Catholic Church in the 1500s. 83% of the prayers from the traditional Mass were deleted and not brought into the new Mass. We have also seen the tabernacle moved to the side or to a separate room outside the church, the altar rail removed. Traditional statues and the Stations of the Cross have been removed. and the new churches that are built look like they are designed by demons from the pit of hell. The inside of Catholic churches were changed, and now many look just like the inside of Masonic lodges. In the middle of the church where the tabernacle used to be present, a presider chair is now present, and man now sits in that chair. It is man in the place of God. This is the religion of the Antichrist. Jean Guiton, an intimate friend of Paul VI, wrote, quote, "The intention of Paul VI with regard to what is commonly called the New Mass was to reform the Catholic liturgy in such a way that it should almost coincide with the Protestant liturgy. There was with Paul VI an ecumenical intention to remove, or at least to correct, or at least to relax what was too Catholic in the traditional sense in the Mass, and I repeat, to get the Catholic Mass closer to the Calvinist Mass," end quote. Our Lord said in the last days in Matthew 24:15 that, quote, "When therefore you shall see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, he that readeth let him understand." The term abomination of desolation also appears in 1st and 2nd Maccabees in the Old Testament. We believe that Jesus is telling us to look for something similar to the abomination of desolation that appeared in 1st and 2nd Maccabees. In the Maccabees, the abomination of desolation was an object, a second altar erected upon and over against the altar of God in the Jewish temple as an integral part of a false and idolatrous form of worship introduced in substitution of the true sacrifice at a general time of apostasy of Jews from their received faith. It was also the only time in Jewish liturgical history that women were all over the altar. 2 Maccabees chapter 6 verse 4, quote, "And women thrust themselves of their accord into the holy places, and brought in things that were not lawful." Many people don't know that everything past the altar rail is actually considered part of the altar. The altar is not just the rectangular stone slab where the tabernacle rests. So when Paul VI introduced the new Mass, he was replicating what happened with the abomination of desolation in the Old Testament. A second tabular altar was placed upon and over against the true altar of God. We believe that the new Mass is the abomination of desolation predicted to happen at the end of the world. Also, Jesus, the Lamb of God, was slain on a Passover. Therefore, the Mass would also be slain on a Passover. Paul VI attempted to kill the Mass by establishing the new Mass on Passover, April 3, 1969. Caiaphas was the one who ordered Christ to be put to death by crucifixion. As the Jewish high priest, he wore the rationale of judgment of a Jewish high priest, also known as the breastplate of the ephod. Paul VI also wore this vestment on numerous occasions. Not only is this the breastplate of a Jewish high priest, but according to the Encyclopedia of Freemasonry by Mackey, the ephod is also, quote, worn in the Masonic American chapters of the Royal Arch by the high priest as an official part of his official ornaments. Paul VI wanted to put Christ to death in the Mass by removing it and replacing it with a counterfeit, and wanted to kill his Catholic Church by attempting to change the Church completely. Here is Paul VI giving a textbook Masonic handshake to an Orthodox schismatic bishop. Here is Paul VI's signature, and when you turn it upside down you get 3 clear 6s. This is the way that Paul VI's signature always appeared. God allows things like this to come out to show the people that these men were infiltrators and enemies of the Catholic Church. Daniel also predicts that the true sacrifice will cease at the same time the abomination of desolation is set up. Paul VI also fulfilled this prophecy of Daniel by causing the true sacrifice of the Mass to cease throughout the world. Paul VI replaced the traditional Mass with a new Mass. Paul VI's new Mass has removed certain words that the Council of Florence and Pope St. Pius V declared to be necessary for a valid consecration. This issue is covered in much more depth in our video, Why the New Mass and New Rite of Ordination Are Invalid. Another proof that there was an impostor, Sister Lucia, is the fact that the real Sister Lucia would have never accepted the new Mass. In fact, the impostor, Sister Lucia, would even receive, quote, communion from the other sisters of her convent. Also, when the impostor Sister Lucia received, quote, communion from John Paul II at Fatima on May 13, 2000, she engaged in totally bizarre activity by kissing John Paul II's hand immediately after receiving, quote, communion from him. I have never seen or heard of anyone else in the world ever kissing a priest or bishop's hand right after Holy Communion was put into their mouth. This activity was so incredibly strange that there are almost no words to describe this scene. This by itself is proof positive that this person was most certainly not the real Sister Lucia. After kissing John Paul II's hand, she asked one of her bodyguards if she could stay on the altar with John Paul II, as John Paul II continued to distribute, quote, communion to the other people. This is as bizarre as kissing his hand right after, quote, communion. But the message that the devil wanted to convey was quite clear. John Paul II is the hero of the third secret. He is so great and so holy, when the truth is just the opposite. John Paul II was an anti-pope. He was a total heretic, schismatic, and apostate, as we prove in our video, Why John Paul II Was Not the Pope. We prove that John Paul II taught that all men are saved, that non-Catholic religions are a means of salvation, that the Holy Ghost is responsible for creating the different false religions of the world, and that we should not convert non-Catholics to the Catholic faith. You can see all the evidence on our website, VaticanCatholic.com. Going back to Paul VI, Paul VI uttered numerous heresies which are covered in our video, The Amazing Heresies of Paul VI. Paul VI abolished the oath against modernism, the index of forbidden books, and removed the solemn exorcisms from the baptismal rite. Paul VI granted more than 32,000 requests from priests who asked to be released from their vows and returned to the lay status, the greatest exodus from the priesthood since the Protestant Revolution. In 1964, Paul VI gave away the papal tiara, which was the sign of a true pope's authority. In 1969, Paul VI removed 40 saints from the official liturgical calendar. Under Paul VI, the Holy Office was reformed, and its primary function now was research, no longer defending the purity of the Catholic faith. Paul VI, with his so-called apostolic authority, solemnly confirmed all 16 documents of Vatican II. So if you accept Paul VI as a true pope, you must accept all the documents of Vatican II as infallible. And the documents of Vatican II contain hundreds of heretical statements. This also proves that Paul VI was not a true pope. The reason why is because when a true pope solemnly ratifies any teachings on faith or morals, those teachings must be free from error. So only an anti-pope like Paul VI would ever ratify the outrageous heresies of Vatican II. The heretical statements made in Vatican II have been the attempted justification for the new way of doing things in the Church that has occurred since Vatican II. Vatican II taught that Catholic churches should be shared with non-Catholics, and that these heretics and schismatics should be worked with in missionary projects. Vatican II also teaches that Protestants and the quote Orthodox may lawfully receive communion, and that they are united and in communion with the Catholic Church. This is why John Paul II, when he did his consecration of the world on March 25, 1984, he asked the quote Orthodox bishops of the world to join him in this consecration, because he regarded them as members of the true Church of Christ. This is proven in the article John Paul II and the Collegial Consecration of 1984. On page 2 it says, quote, John Paul II decided to renew the consecration in March 1984, with the letters being sent to all the world's bishops in good time, including the Orthodox, asking them to join him in this action, end quote. After Vatican II, it has been taught repeatedly that Protestants in the Eastern quote Orthodox don't need to be converted to the Catholic faith. This heretical teaching flowed logically from Vatican II, and it is summed up in the words of Cardinal Walter Casper. Cardinal Walter Casper, quote, Today we no longer understand ecumenism in the sense of a return, by which the others would be converted and return to being Catholics. This was expressly abandoned by Vatican II, end quote. Benedict XVI said the same thing in his address to the Protestants at World Youth Day, August 19, 2005 in Germany, quote, "And now we ask, what does it mean to restore the unity of all Christians? This unity does not mean what could be called ecumenism of the return, that is, to deny and to reject one's own faith history. Absolutely not," end quote. John Paul II entered into agreements with leading non-Catholic schismatics, in which they denounced trying to convert each other. Pope Pius XI taught in his encyclical Mortalium Animos, January 6, 1928, quote, "For the union of Christians can only be promoted by promoting a return to the one true Church of Christ of those who are separated from it." Pope Leo XIII, Satis Cognitum, number 13, June 29, 1896, quote, "You are not to be looked upon as holding the true Catholic faith if you do not teach that the faith of Rome is to be held." John Paul II also said that saints and martyrs come from non-Catholic churches. John Paul II also approved the Vatican Lutheran Agreement on Justification. This heretical agreement contains many heresies, including that the canons of the Council of Trent no longer apply. It also says that the Lutheran heresy of justification by faith alone is not condemned by the Council of Trent. We have also seen the Vatican II anti-popes give donations to non-Catholic churches, praise their so-called Christian leaders as pastors in the Church of Christ. We've also seen the Vatican II anti-popes declare that these non-Catholic church leaders have ordinary jurisdiction in the church. The Vatican II anti-popes have constantly heaped praise on non-Catholic leaders, especially the schismatic quote Orthodox leaders and their non-Catholic churches. The quote Orthodox are heretics and schismatics who reject the last 13 councils of the Catholic Church. They reject the papacy and many other teachings of the Catholic Church. But Benedict XVI constantly calls these bishops of the quote Orthodox Church archbishops. To declare someone an archbishop is a declaration that you believe that bishop is a lawful jurisdictional bishop of the one true Church of Christ. Here are just a few examples of Benedict XVI praising these non-Catholic schismatic bishops and their non-Catholic churches. Benedict XVI message, February 1st, 2009, quote, "To His Holiness Kirill, Patriarch of Moscow and of all Russia, I greet your holiness with joy as you undertake the great responsibility of shepherding the venerable Russian Orthodox Church. I wish therefore to reaffirm my esteem and my spiritual closeness. I pray that our Heavenly Father will grant you the abundant gifts of the Holy Spirit in your ministry and enable you to guide the Church. Conscious of the enormous responsibilities which accompany the spiritual and pastoral ministry to which the Holy Spirit has called you, I ask Almighty God to bless you with His love, to watch over the beloved Russian Church." Benedict XVI letter, May 29, 2008, quote, "To His Holiness Alexis II, Patriarch of Moscow and all Russia, the visit to Russia of His Eminence Cardinal Walter Kasper offers me a welcome opportunity to extend my cordial greetings, to express my esteem for your ministry in the Russian Orthodox Church." Benedict XVI message, September 12, 2007, quote, "To His Beatitude Daniel, Archbishop of Bucharest, Patriarch of the Romanian Orthodox Church, the new pastor called to lead the Romanian Orthodox Church, I ask the Holy Spirit to sustain you in this weighty office. May He help the Romanian Orthodox Church in her development." Benedict XVI telegram, January 28, 2008, to new, quote, Orthodox Metropolitan, quote, "Christodoulos, Archbishop of Athens and all Greece, this distinguished pastor of the Church of Greece." Benedict XVI Catechesis, January 21st, 2009, quote, "The new patriarch of their venerable and great Orthodox Church." Benedict XVI message, May 6, 2009, quote, "I also impart a warm greeting and blessing to the beloved Orthodox Patriarch and to all the members of that noble church." Benedict XVI message to, quote, Orthodox Schismatic Patriarch, February 20th, 2006, quote, "To His Holiness Alexei II, Patriarch of Moscow, and of all the Russias, I invoke abundant blessings from the Lord upon you yourself and upon your ministry, generously dedicated to the great cause of the gospel. May you continue to fulfill fruitfully the mission that God has entrusted to you. Benedict XVI Common Declaration with Schismatic Patriarch Bartholomew I, November 30th, 2006, quote, "Our responsibility as pastors in the Church of Christ." So according to Benedict XVI, to be a schismatic is to be a pastor in the Church of Christ. So we can see just from these few examples that Benedict XVI praises the schismatic quote Orthodox and their leaders. To be a schismatic is praiseworthy according to Benedict XVI. And Benedict XVI praises the different Protestant churches and their leaders. Benedict XVI address, October 27, 2006, quote, "The richness of different Christian traditions." Brother Roger Schutz was a non-Catholic who founded the ecumenical non-denominational monastery in Taizé, France. Benedict XVI gave this non-Catholic communion, said he was a witness of faith, and that he went straight to heaven after he died. Benedict XVI addressed November 23, 2006 to Dr. Rowan Williams, primate of the Anglican Communion, quote, "It is our fervent hope that the Anglican Communion will remain grounded in the Gospels and the apostolic tradition. May the Lord continue to bless you and your family, and may He strengthen you in your ministry to the Anglican Communion. The Anglican sect is grounded not in apostolic tradition, but in the tradition of Henry VIII's adultery and schismatic break from the Catholic Church. Benedict XVI encourages the schismatic and heretical head of the Anglican sect in his, quote, ministry, and mocks all the saints and martyrs who suffered and died as martyrs, because they wouldn't become Anglicans." On page 88 of his book, The Meaning of Christian Brotherhood, the then Joseph Ratzinger, now Benedict XVI, explicitly states that Protestantism is not heresy. Pope Pius XI, January 26, 1923, quote, "The heresies begotten by the Protestant Reformation. It is in these heresies that we discover the beginnings of that apostasy of mankind from the Church." Pope Gregory XVI, May 27, 1832, quote, "Finally, some of these misguided people attempt to persuade themselves and others that men are not saved only in the Catholic religion, but that even heretics may attain eternal life." And we can see Benedict XVI's teaching that Protestants and the quote Orthodox are not heretical and should not be converted, also taught by the United States Conference of quote Catholic Bishops. On September 18, 2009, the United States Conference of quote Catholic Bishops issued a press release called 10 Things to Know About Working for Christian Unity. In point 9 it states, quote, "Proselytism, or the deliberate targeting of another Christian or group of Christians for the sole purpose of getting them to reject their church to join another, is not allowed. Some people may feel called in conscience to change from one tradition to another, but sheep stealing is unacceptable," end quote. But the heresies that most clearly demonstrate the apostasy of Vatican II is its teaching on the different false religions of the world. Vatican II teaches that non-Catholic sects are a means of salvation. Vatican II teaches that Muslims and Catholics together worship the true God. Vatican II teaches that one can be an atheist through no fault of his own. Vatican II praises the false religion of Hinduism. And there are many other heresies in Vatican II, and we can also see that the heresies of Vatican II have been promoted in the Vatican's official newspaper, L'Osservatore Romano. This weekly newspaper contains all the official speeches and writings of the men who claim to be Pope. The Vatican has reprinted issues of their newspaper from April 4, 1968 to the present. I have personally gone through every weekly issue of the Vatican's official newspaper from April 4, 1968 to present. In these newspapers, one can see the utter religious indifferentism and apostasy of Vatican II promoted by the anti-popes who have reigned from Rome over the last 50 years. Paul VI's General Audience, September 5, 1973, quote, "Buddhism is one of the riches of Asia." Paul VI's speech to Buddhist spiritual leader, January 17, 1975, quote, "The Second Vatican Council has expressed sincere admiration for Buddhism in its various forms. Paul VI addressed a Buddhist patriarch of Laos, June 8, 1973, quote, Buddhism, the Catholic Church considers its spiritual riches with esteem, and respects and wishes to collaborate with you as religious men to bring about real peace and the salvation of man. Paul VI's speech, September 9, 1972, quote, We would also like you to know that the Church recognizes the riches of the Islamic faith, a faith that binds us to the one God. In 1984, John Paul II visited the Buddhist temple. Before entering this temple of idolatry, John Paul II expressed how anxious he was to meet, quote, His Holiness the Supreme Buddhist Patriarch in the temple. After John Paul II entered the temple, he bowed to the Buddhist Patriarch, who sat in front of a gigantic statue of Buddha. This is apostasy. The Council of Elvira in 305 stated, quote, It has been decreed that those who in adult age after receiving baptism shall go into the pagan temples to worship idols, which is a deadly crime and the height of wickedness, shall not be admitted to communion even at death. On August 8, 1985, John Paul II prayed with African animist witch doctors. On April 13, 1986, John Paul II traveled to the Jewish synagogue in Rome, Italy, where he took part in a Jewish religious service. John Paul II even bowed his head with the other Jews and the chief rabbi as they said a prayer for the coming of the Messiah, who they explicitly believe is not Jesus Christ. This incredible act of apostasy by John Paul II was directly connected to his heretical teaching that the Old Covenant religion is still in force. The Catholic Church teaches that with the coming of Jesus Christ and the promulgation of the gospel, the Old Covenant, that is, the agreement between God and the Jews through the mediation of Moses, ceased and was replaced with the new covenant of our Lord Jesus Christ. It's true that some aspects of the Old Covenant are still valid, because they are included in the new and eternal covenant of Jesus Christ, such as the Ten Commandments. But the Old Covenant itself, the agreement between God and the Jewish people, ceased with the coming of the Messiah. Therefore, to say that the Old Covenant is still valid is to assert that Judaism is a true religion, and that Jesus Christ is not really the Messiah. It is also to deny defined Catholic dogma, such as the teaching of the Council of Florence, which define ex cathedra, that the old law is now dead, and that those who attempt to practice it, namely the Jews, cannot be saved. Pope Benedict XIV, ex quo primum number 61, March 1, 1756, quote, The first consideration is that the ceremonies of the Mosaic law were abrogated by the coming of Christ, and that they can no longer be observed without sin after the promulgation of the gospel. Pope Pius XII, Mystici Corpus Christi, numbers 29 and 30, June 29, 1943, quote, The New Testament took the place of the old law which had been abolished. On the cross, then, the old law died. Pope Benedict XIV, ex quo primum, number 59, quote, However, they are not attempting to observe the precepts of the old law, which, as everybody knows, have been revoked by the coming of Christ. In an address to Jews in West Germany, November 17, 1980, John Paul II spoke of, quote, the Old Covenant never revoked by God. John Paul II also taught this in his New Catechism, paragraph 121, quote, For the Old Covenant has never been revoked. John Paul II asked his Jewish friend Gilbert Levine to conduct a Jewish religious service in the Vatican. With John Paul II and the Rabbi of Rome in attendance, a Jewish service took place. During this service, they sang Kol Nidra, the prayer sung on the holiest day of the Jewish calendar. Many Jews also lit candles during this ceremony. Levine remarked, quote, It was like I was in a Jewish liturgical service in the Vatican. It was a night of prayer, of Jewish prayer. After the ceremony ended, John Paul II called for Levine to receive the Vatican knighthood. Levine became a knight commander of the Equestrian Order of St. Gregory the Great. Cardinal Lustiger of John Paul II's Vatican II Church bestowed the honor. Lustiger himself stated in a 1981 interview, quote, I am a Jew. For me, the two religions are one. During an interview on CNN's Larry King Live, April 4, 2005, Gilbert Levine revealed that John Paul II gave his family a menorah, and sent his sons letters of congratulations on the days that they had their bar mitzvahs. He also said that he received a letter from Cardinal Walter Casper of the Vatican II Church, in which Casper told Levine's family to be proud of their Jewish heritage and live it out to the full. Gilbert Levine has stated that John Paul II never gave him the slightest indication that he wanted to convert him. John Paul II's best friend was his lifelong friend Jerzy Kluger, who was a Jew. As a youth, John Paul II played soccer goalie with Kluger on the Jewish team against the Catholics. After John Paul II's October 16, 1978 election as antipope, the very first, quote, papal audience that John Paul II gave was to Kluger's family. Kluger also stated that John Paul II never gave him the slightest indication he wanted to convert him. Kluger credits his lifelong relationship with John Paul II with making him feel, quote, more Jewish. Another thing that John Paul II did constantly was call Jews and Muslims the children of Abraham. This is a blasphemy against Jesus Christ. St. Paul clearly teaches in Galatians 3:29, quote, and if you be Christ's, then you are the seed of Abraham. Only those who accept Jesus Christ are the children of Abraham. On October 27, 1986, John Paul II prayed with 100 different religious leaders in Assisi, Italy. The entire event was the idea of John Paul II. During this meeting, the Dalai Lama placed a Buddhist statue on the tabernacle in the Church of St. Francis. Among the various false religious leaders at this event were rabbis, Islamic muftis, Buddhist monks, Shintoists, assorted Protestant ministers, animists, Jainists, and others. This activity has always been condemned by the Catholic Church as mortally sinful and apostasy from the true faith. Pope Pius XI, Mortalium Animos, No. 10, January 6, 1928, quote, this apostolic see has never allowed its subjects to take part in the assemblies of non-Catholics. On May 14, 1999, John Paul II bowed to and kissed the Koran, the Muslims' holy book, which blasphemes the Trinity and denies the divinity of Jesus Christ. This is apostasy. On March 21, 2000 in Jordan, John Paul II said, quote, may St. John the Baptist protect Islam and all the people of Jordan. On January 24, 2002, John Paul II held a second pagan prayer meeting in Assisi, Italy. During this meeting, a representative of every false religion was allowed to come to the pulpit and give a sermon on world peace. Standing right in front of John Paul II, a voodoo high priest came to the pulpit and gave the voodoo prescription for world peace. Voodooists are witch doctors. The Hindu leader came to the pulpit and told everyone they are God. After the other false religious leaders gave their talks, the various false religious leaders broke up to go to different rooms of the monastery to pray to their false gods. John Paul II had it arranged in advance that each false religion was given a separate room in which to worship the devil. All of the crucifixes were removed, and the crucifixes which could not be removed were covered. Greater abomination, blasphemy, and rejection of the true God almost cannot be imagined. On May 23, 2004, John Paul II sent a message to the chief rabbi of Rome in commemoration of the Jewish synagogue. John Paul II, May 23, 2004, quote, to the most distinguished chief rabbi of Rome, Shalom. For more than 2,000 years, your community has been an integral part of life in the city. It can boast of being the most ancient Jewish community in Western Europe and of having played an important role in spreading Judaism on this continent. Today's celebration, in whose joy we all readily join, recalls the first century of this majestic synagogue. The Christian community of Rome, through the successor of Peter, joins you in thanking the Lord for this happy occasion, end quote. In this message, John Paul II promotes the spread of Judaism and celebrates with deep joy the anniversary of a synagogue. John Paul II absolutely encouraged the denial of Jesus Christ. In light of these facts, anyone who does not say that John Paul II was an apostate is a total liar and an apostate himself. Because even if a person didn't say and do what John Paul II did and said, To still regard such a person as having the Catholic faith is to be an apostate yourself. Benedict XVI, John Paul II's successor as antipope, promotes the same heresies as John Paul II in regard to non-Christian religions. On August 19, 2005, a Friday at noon, the same day and hour that Jesus was crucified, Benedict XVI arrived at the Jewish synagogue in Cologne, Germany, and took active part in a Jewish worship service. In taking part in a Jewish worship service, Benedict XVI committed a public act of apostasy. At the synagogue, Benedict XVI was seated prominently near the front. The synagogue was packed with Jews who were there to see him. Benedict XVI was not only an integral part of the Jewish worship service, he was its main feature. This is, without any doubt, active participation in the Jewish religion. Very close to Benedict XVI, the cantor of the synagogue prayed and sang Jewish prayers at the top of his lungs. Benedict XVI made gestures such as bowing his head and clapping his hands to show his approval and participation in the Jewish service. He joined the Jews in the Kaddish prayer, and Yiddish music blared in the background. When Benedict XVI rose to speak and eventually to pray in the synagogue, the entire synagogue rose to its feet and applauded him for his acceptance of their religion. Everyone on earth who saw this event knows that it had one meaning. Benedict XVI has no problem with Jews who reject Jesus Christ, and according to him they have no obligation to accept Jesus Christ to be saved. Pope Eugene IV, Council of Florence, Cantate Domino, 1441 ex cathedra, quote, "The Holy Roman Church firmly believes, professes, and preaches that all those who are outside the Catholic Church, not only pagans, but also Jews, or heretics and schismatics, cannot share in eternal life, and will go into the everlasting fire which was prepared for the devil and his angels, unless they are joined to the Church before the end of their lives." Benedict XVI addressed the Chief Rabbi of Rome, January 16, 2006, quote, "Distinguished Chief Rabbi, you were recently entrusted with the spiritual guidance of Rome's Jewish community. I offer you my heartfelt good wishes for your mission, and I assure you of my own and my collaborators' cordial esteem and friendship. Benedict XVI esteems a leader of a false religion, which explicitly holds that Jesus Christ is not the Messiah." Benedict XVI addressed the Jewish community September 12, 2008, quote, "I cannot neglect on an occasion such as this to recall the eminent role played by the Jews of France in the building up of the whole nation and of their prestigious contribution to her spiritual patrimony." On November 30, 2006, Benedict XVI visited the Blue Mosque in Istanbul, Turkey. Benedict XVI prayed toward Mecca with the Grand Mufti. Benedict XVI also crossed his arms in the Muslim prayer gesture called the Gesture of Tranquility. Benedict XVI addressed January 19, 2007, quote, "I frequently express the respect of the Catholic Church for Islam, and the esteem of the Pope and the faithful for Muslim believers, especially during my visit to Istanbul's Blue Mosque." Benedict XVI addressed December 16, 2007, quote, "My visit to Turkey afforded me the opportunity to show also publicly my respect for the Islamic religion." Benedict XVI addressed November 28, 2006, quote, "I greet all the Muslims in Turkey with particular esteem. This noble land has also seen a remarkable flowering of Islamic civilization in the most diverse fields." Benedict XVI Catechesis, December 6, 2006, quote, "I thus had a favorable opportunity to renew my sentiments of esteem for the Muslims and for the Islamic civilizations." Benedict XVI addressed September 25, 2006, quote, "I should like to reiterate today all the esteem and the profound respect that I have for Muslim believers." Benedict XVI, May 9, 2009, addressed to Muslim leaders outside a mosque, quote, "Places of worship like this splendid mosque, named after the revered late king, stand out like jewels across the earth's surface. From the ancient to the modern, the magnificent to the humble, they all point to the divine. Benedict XVI address, September 12, 2008, quote, I thank the delegates of the French Islamic community for having accepted the invitation to participate in this meeting. I convey to them my best wishes for the holy season of Ramadan already underway. So the particular religious seasons of false religions are holy seasons according to the apostate Benedict XVI. Benedict XVI Catechesis, August 24, 2005, quote, as well as esteem for the other great religious traditions, Islam occupies a special place among them. Its followers worship the same God. Benedict XVI, May 16, 2008, addressed to bishops from Thailand, quote, you have readily expressed to me your great respect for the Buddhist monasteries and the esteem you have for the contribution they make to the social and cultural life of the Thai people. Benedict XVI address, May 24, 2007, quote, esteem and respect for all other religions. So Benedict XVI esteems all these non-Catholic religions that totally reject Jesus Christ and the Catholic faith. Benedict XVI is a total apostate. The Catholic Church has had about 40 anti-popes in church history. An anti-pope is an uncanonically elected, quote, pope, that is a person claiming to be pope who has not been legally elected. The Catholic Church has infallibly taught that a heretic cannot be a true pope. The reason for this is that a pope is a member of the Church and the visible head of the Church, but a heretic places himself outside the Church and ceases to be a member of the Church. Thus, a heretic cannot be the Pope. This is why the Code of Canon Law, Pope Paul IV, St. Francis de Sales, St. Alphonsus, and St. Robert Bellarmine all teach that a heretic cannot be a pope, and if a true pope were to become a manifest heretic, he would cease to be the pope. This teaching is rooted in the infallible dogma that a heretic is not a Catholic and is not a member of the Church. St. Francis de Sales, quote, now when he, the Pope, is explicitly a heretic, he falls ipso facto from his dignity and out of the Church. St. Antoninus, quote, in the case in which the Pope would become a heretic, he would find himself by that fact alone, and without any other sentence, separated from the Church. He could not be a heretic and remain Pope. Pope Paul IV taught the same thing in his bull Cum ex Apostolos Officio, that no Catholic can accept a person as a pope who can be shown to be a heretic. We believe that one reason that Our Lady may have appeared on May 13th is that it is the feast of St. Robert Bellarmine. St. Robert made the most famous statements in church history on how if the pope became a manifest heretic, he would cease to be the pope. St. Robert Bellarmine, quote, a pope who is a manifest heretic automatically ceases to be pope and head, just as he ceases automatically to be a Christian and a member of the Church, wherefore he can be judged and punished by the Church. This is the teaching of all the ancient fathers, who teach that manifest heretics immediately lose all jurisdiction. St. Robert Bellarmine, quote, he who is not a Christian is not a member of the Church, and a manifest heretic is not a Christian, as is clearly taught by St. Cyprian, St. Athanasius, St. Jerome, and others. Therefore, the manifest heretic cannot be pope. Pope Pius XII, Mystici Corpus Christi, number 23, June 29, 1943, quote, for not every sin, however grave it may be, is such as of its own nature to sever a man from the body of the Church, as does schism or heresy or apostasy. Pope Innocent III, Eis Exempla, December 18, 1208, quote, by the heart we believe and by the mouth we confess the one Church, not of heretics, but the Holy Roman Catholic and Apostolic Church, outside of which we believe that no one is saved. And how do we judge that someone is a heretic? St. Robert Bellarmine, quote, for men are not bound or able to read hearts, but when they see that someone is a heretic by his external works, they judge him to be a heretic pure and simple, and condemn him as a heretic. The apostasy of Vatican II and its anti-popes has permeated all levels of the Vatican II Church. We see this demonstrated in many ways. We see the religious indifferentism all the time, praising of non-Catholic churches and their false religious leaders. We see the constant participation of the priests and bishops of the Vatican II Church in the services of false religions. We also see the complete acceptance of pro-abortion politicians as, quote, Catholics. These wicked people are given, quote, communion with no exceptions. Here we see the notorious supporter of abortion, John Kerry, receiving, quote, communion. Notice the miraculous image of a baby which appears as if Kerry is eating. An official, quote, Catholic funeral was given recently to Ted Kennedy. Cardinal O'Malley of the Vatican II Church, who conducted the funeral for Kennedy, praised Kennedy's work and life and said that we will see him again in heaven. Kennedy's work included being one of the most aggressive supporters of abortion on demand. Kennedy also supported aggressively gay, quote, marriage. He even voted against a bill which would have defined marriage as the union between a man and a woman. He also voted against a bill which would have banned partial birth abortion. Ted Kennedy was given, quote, communion during his life, and of course he was commemorated as a servant of Christ after his death by the Vatican II Church. On August 12, 2002, the United States Conference of so-called Catholic Bishops issued a document on the Jews. The document publicly declared that, quote, campaigns that target Jews for conversion to Christianity are no longer theologically acceptable in the Catholic Church. On October 2, 2009, the United States Conference of so-called Catholic Bishops issued a, quote, statement of principles for Catholic-Jewish dialogue. They declare, quote, Jewish-Catholic dialogue, one of the blessed fruits of the Second Vatican Council, has never been and will never be used by the Catholic Church as a means of proselytism, nor is it intended as a disguised invitation to baptism, end quote. Many non-Catholics who have wanted to convert to the Catholic Church have been told by the Vatican II Church that they should not convert. The Vatican II Church also does not believe in the indissolubility of marriage, for as long as you file a petition for an annulment with the diocese and pay their fee, your marriage will be declared by them almost 100% of the time as never being valid. The Vatican II colleges are a total disgrace, for they allow the promotion of lesbianism, homosexuality, and abortion. These things are all allowed with the full approval of the so-called Catholic leaders in their area. These so-called Catholic colleges also frequently attack the dogmas of the Catholic Church, the inerrancy of the Bible, and the divinity and miracles of Jesus Christ. One small example of the apostasy of the Vatican II colleges is the following from Seton Hall University. The Seton Hall website states, quote, the staff of campus ministry will direct any member of the university community to local congregations that will foster individual spiritual development. The Interfaith Directory is a resource for students of other faiths to locate a church of their denomination in the area. And Seton Hall lists the full contact info for local synagogues, Islamic centers, quote, Orthodox churches, Protestant churches, and Buddhist religious centers. This is apostasy. The Vatican II high schools and elementary schools promote the apostasy of religious indifferentism, and they also promote the abominable and satanic sex education which is forced upon little children starting in kindergarten. This filthy and demonic, quote, sex education encourages the youngest children to commit mortal sins such as masturbation, which will send them to hell forever. And of course, the apostate Benedict XVI, who is well aware of these abominations, doesn't say a word. Matthew 18 verse 6, quote, but he that shall scandalize one of these little ones that believe in me, it were better for him that a millstone should be hanged about his neck, and that he should be drowned in the depth of the sea. Every year, Benedict XVI's official newspaper sends a message of greeting and congratulations to the Buddhists for their feast of Vesak, the Muslims for the end of Ramadan, and the Hindus for the feast of Diwali. We also see the Vatican II's monasteries have fully embraced this apostasy. Just one example is so-called Trappist priests, who have been installed by others as official teachers of Zen Buddhism. On May 5, 2004, a Hindu high priest and other Hindus prayed and worshiped one of their many false gods in the chapel of the apparitions of Our Lady of Fatima. After they prayed, they were greeted by the apostate so-called Catholic Bishop of Fatima. who gave full approval to this act of apostasy. One of the ways that we know that the impostor Sister Lucia fully accepted the apostasy of Vatican II was because she made her own outrageously heretical statements. For example, in 1992, she was reported as saying, quote, "God condemns no one to hell." And on March 25, 1997, the impostor Sister Lucia claimed to finish a book called Calls from the Message of Fatima. The Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith authorized this publication, and on pages 195 and 196 of this book she makes the following heretical statements. Quote, "Everyone is obliged to be holy, even those who have no faith. Obviously, in the case of those who have no faith, the holiness will be that dictated by their own conscience. As I was saying, those who do not have the happiness of possessing the gift of faith are also bound to become holy by a dictate of the human conscience." The impostor Sister Lucia makes the heretical statement that those who have no faith can become holy. No one is holy unless they have baptism and the true Catholic faith. In Hebrews 11:6, St. Paul teaches, quote, "Without faith it is impossible to please God." In other words, without the faith it is impossible to be saved or to be holy. St. Paul teaches the opposite of the impostor Sister Lucia. She also denies the defined Catholic dogma that there is no salvation outside the Church. Pope Gregory XVI, Mirari Vos, number 13, August 15, 1832, quote, "They should consider the testimony of Christ himself, that those who are not with Christ are against him, and that they disperse unhappily who do not gather with him. Therefore, without a doubt,